Good morning and welcome back to the Isle of Faces. Welcome back to Scraps and Scrolls. Here we are again. We're back for Dance with Dragons Part 12. Yes, we've reached that level of ARYA / Scraps and Scrolls already. We're heading into the back straight nearly. We're not quite there, but we are heading towards the end of the book. Like I say, welcome back. We've had a little break, you might have noticed. However you all spent your holidays and your break, I hope it went well. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. You know me, I'm not a Christmas man, but I did take a break from doing some work. I did take a break from Twitter especially, which I could not recommend to you more because that place is a little bit of a hellscape. And let me tell you, that was very, very much relished here in this household. But here we are, you've come back across the God's Eye. Thank you so much for doing so as we continue our journey through A Dance with Dragons / Scraps and Scrolls / ARYA. And you'll know we've got some catching up to do this week because Aziz and Asha kept at it. They put out part 13 before this part has come out, which I think is the first time we've fallen a week behind. So after 5 books and 18 months, that's not a bad going, is it? But now we've got to catch up, haven't we? So you should be listening to this only a few days after part 11. We're going to have them fairly close together here just to get back into the swing of things. And part 13 will be just around the corner, both on History of Westeros and the other faces. So we should be back to normal pretty quickly. With that in mind, I'm not going to dilly-dally around with too many notifications or anything like that for you today. I can tell you there are more things coming to the Isle. I've had a little bit of time to think, a little bit of time to plan. Won't go into them today, but I should tell you just to keep an eye on that horizon for me. I again want to just give you the best wishes for the holidays and whatever you've been up to, because I know it's a bit different this year, a bit more difficult. If you're in my country, we've been put back into tougher restrictions and such, so hopefully this podcast can just help out in any way it can. I must say, as I so often have to do, I've had some really, really nicely worded reviews lately, telling of, again, this podcast is used in hard times. The same for tweets and personal messages, so thank you so much for just letting me know. It's always lovely to have that feedback, and I'm just glad it is of some worth to you in some way. Lovely. Makes me keep going, doesn't it? And while we're giving thanks, well, you know, I can't leave out the patrons. I've mentioned them already, but you guys are the ones that really keep that engine turning. You are oh so lovely over on the Patreon page, and again with private messages and everything else. So as a treat, because we've had a little bit of a holidays, a little bit of a special time, today's shoutouts are not just to our upper tiers. I'm going to extend it down to the lime leaves as well, so I'm going to include everybody here. Strap yourselves in for a minute or so as I thank Grizzly Meadows, Julie Beth of Tarth, Little Wolfbird, Philip D, Glenn T, Aegon the Sixth, you know, our Lord Commander Damian Darklin, KM of course, Jen A, Crystal F, Steve M, Chloe K, A&A, and of course, Archmaester June, the healer of the lesser poxes. Thank you all. Thank you to everyone in the lower tiers as well, of course. Your continued generosity and support, well, they wouldn't be an Isle without it, would there? So you've brought us back here from the break. You're the one that keeps us going. This is always dedicated to you. But let's keep going, shall we? Let's get into what we're doing today. We've got to do that catch up. We've got to get going. I know it's cold outside. The solar energy is lacking, but we're going to have to just push through with some extra energy today. What 4 chapters are we looking at? Well, we're going to start. Hooray, huzzah, we're lucky we are. It is Asha. We return to Asha. Thankfully, it seems too long since the Wayward Bride. You know I love Asha, so that's a great way to start the day, isn't it? Not the happiest of chapters, unfortunately, but we get Asha, so let's take ourselves as lucky. We then move on to Daenerys VII, where it's a damn sight warmer, but not that much happier as wedding bells start chiming in the air, and we get the final crossover of Quentyn and Daenerys that we've all been waiting for so long. It is then back to Westeros. We're doing a bit of a zigzag between Westeros and Essos today. We're going back to the north this time for Jon IX, where Jon starts putting some of his plans into action with Tycho and Astoris, before he's going to do about Hardhome. But we also have the arrival of Selyse Baratheon, so I hope you've got some party poppers left over, I suppose. And as if that isn't enough, we get some final payoff for what Melisandre's fire visions meant, where a certain girl turns up at the gates. And speaking of, our final chapter, we're dashing back across the Narrow Sea. Our last chapter today, ARYA I / The Blind Girl. That's right, she's back. We are very, very spoiled today. We've got Asha at the beginning, we've got ARYA at the end. 2 of our favourites. What a long time it has been since we've been able to talk about one of our favourite central characters. So we're looking forward to that. Let's get to it, we don't want to wait any longer. Let's head in straight away now to our first chapter of the day. As I said, it is Asha 2 / The King's Prize. Oh, I'm going to have to, it's what a way to start off. I'm going to have to calm down a little bit. Asha, again. How else can I say it? Well, firstly, it's just a huge relief to see that name again, isn't it? Because really, we did not know. We didn't know that we would get her back. Remember how that first chapter of hers, The Wayward Bride, that beautiful chapter where she collapsed in on her own choices and she had that lack of direction before the big fight came, where she rallied, not just for an idea, but for the lives of her people. Remember how that ended? In defeat. We didn't know. We didn't know what was going to happen to her. She might have been killed. And we probably didn't think that because that'd be a weird little arc, but still, this is George we're talking about. Who are we to say? And luckily we have found out since that yes, okay, Stannis did capture her thanks to Jon, but still, actually seeing it on page, that's the relief we've been waiting for. And you'll remember that first chapter, that entire first chapter, was laced with this feeling that the land of the North itself was fighting against Asha. It was rallying against her because she was a stranger, she was not supposed to be here. And then the actual Northern people joined in and straight handed her defeat. Well, this chapter we've got today will very much return to the theme of the land doing the fighting, as we are offered what is probably our best look ever at the stormy power of a northern winter, and just how destructive it can be to ideas, campaigns, and ultimately lives. So we're going to have a fairly downer of a chapter in some ways, even though we're excited about Asha, and we're also just excited about this initial riding out, Stannis riding out in force on his way to conquer Winterfell. We've been talking about it for a while now, haven't we, in certain chapters? Theon's been talking about it, Jon's been talking about it, we all know it's going to happen, we've been waiting and here it is. Off he goes to restore right to the world. Okay, sure, we'd rather not see Asha as a prisoner for the experience, but it is hard to contain that excitement for first timers, especially at the beginning of the chapter, as the force for what most would term good in general. I know Stannis is a bit up and down, but we consider him the good guy compared to the Boltons, don't we? He is now heading towards Winterfell to do justice on the major crimes going on there. Basically, when we come right down to it, we're hoping that Jane can be saved, because we've all felt the weight of that, and we just want any hero to turn up and put a stop to it. Stannis looks to be the man for that. But then again, we're also going to see how quickly those hopes can extinguish in the snow. To bring it back to Asha slightly, this is also where we're going to see her kind of transition into camera mode. Now, she's not going to be anywhere near as bad as ARYA Hotar a few weeks ago, but she is a lot more camera than in her previous chapter. Of her 3 chapters in this book, I would say this is the one where she's the most of a camera woman. This is probably where we'll get the least Asha introspection of all her chapters, and mainly focus more on the descriptions of what's going on, as we do witness what is basically a complete collapse of a military campaign. Make no mistake, what we see in this chapter is essentially unique in the series. Just think of the disasters we've had, and there are a few. I'm not sure any quite compare to what we see here, and we certainly don't get as good a look as how that happens, so this is really a very special chapter. Luckily though, we do get some key Asha moments and important thoughts throughout and see what's going on with her as a person, so it's not like we abandon that completely. We're nowhere near ARYA Hotar level, thankfully. So really what we have today to open our episode here is it's a bittersweet feeling, and George doing his best to toy with us. We're again very happy that Asha is alive, plus she's involved in the story, so that's good. We don't want her just left behind in a dungeon. But she's also in just about the worst situation you could conceive. The majority of that is the physical, as we get the payoff to what the Boltons have been saying in Winterfell, that Stannis is going to get stuck in the snow and the winter. We're really going to see Ned Stark's eternal promise dig its claws in here, but some of it is emotional as well. Now that Asha, our wonderfully brave and creative captain, has been reduced to a prisoner, chained and dragged along, her brilliance kind of dimmed, hidden in the snow. That's not what we want for her personally, or for her progressive ideas, because we love Asha. She's the best. I'm trying not to repeat myself too much here, because I know every time we have an Asha chapter, I have to just go on about how awesome she is, but she is awesome. So we don't want to see her in this situation where she can't show any of that awesomeness off, do we? No, of course not. Besides, we know what lays at the end of this road, even if we ignore the storms, and it's probably not good news for Asha, so it is very much bittersweet. Finally, before we enter the text here, let's just consider the chapter title, The King's Prize. Asha has been reduced to a prize, not for her ability or her deeds, but pretty much just for her surname. She's a prisoner valued by Stannis solely due to her noble birth, which is a damn mistake on his part, and again, annoying for us to see. It does provide some benefits for now, as we'll get to, but even in this chapter, we get the sense that this is a position that may end up being unwelcome. And besides, that's only one way to take the title's meaning, isn't it? We're going to struggle to find a chapter that is as much about a natural event as it is about the POV who owns it. But here we have exactly that. Asha 2 could easily be renamed Winterstorm 1, and we might even look at it as this truly being Stannis' prize, earned for his insistence on a hard march east, or for turning away from the wall, or however you might want to interpret it. Perhaps the King's prize is really Winterfell, as we get our best look of what one must go through to earn it, as opposed to the path of cheating that the Boltons took. I know, again, I've got to slow down. There's just too much to talk about when Asha comes along. You know I love her chapters, and this one is no different. This is one of the really best chapters of the book, in my opinion. Again, because we have Asha, but we also get to see and respect the awesome power of nature and the North, and how much it matters in these huge, world-changing events such as this Northern War. The weather, it just can't be discounted as a huge part of the game. It cannot be ignored. And the way that George presents that to us, as always, is superb. So let's just jump right in, shall we? We open the chapter with the beginning of the journey, with Stannis and his assembled forces riding out from Deepwood-Winterfell, heading east, heading to Winterfell, all ready for glory. Basically, of course they are. They've just had a victory recently, they had another not too long ago at the Wall. Why can't we get a third? Let's go for 3 in a row, shall we? And George makes sure to establish the grandness of it all straight away here in the opening paragraphs. We have to get that feeling right now that this is certain victory, that we're all very, very confident. He describes it as pretty much the perfect mix of experience and freshness, motivation. He shows us the armour. It's dinted and it's scarred because they've been through battles. They want to show off that they are winners, but also they are, again, fresh. They've got the energy. They're nowhere near tired. We have these many bright colours of the banners and the surcoats, which I think is supposed to represent the life and the victory in these former battles. So why can't we repeat that on this campaign as well? We've knocked out the Wall, we got Deepwood-Winterfell, on to Winterfell to continue it. And to keep with that confidence, we establish their large numbers of knights and squires and everything else. We've got outriders, we've got all the food, we've got rear guards, we're all in colour, we're all full of life. And obviously that is intentional by George to really hit that early straight away here, because soon enough, all that colour is going to just be whited out, drained away as the snow comes down, and the life is just drained away as we progress through these pages. I'll read you a little quote here. A riot of colours amidst the winter wood, azure and orange, red and green, purple and blue and gold, glimmering amongst bare brown trunks, grey-green pines and sentinels, drifts of dirty snow. So you see just in that quote, we've got the north versus south kind of thing straight away. Here's the foreigners, here's the army, they've got all their bright, nice colours, but surrounding them already is the much more faded, much more dimmer colours of the land of the north, and the land of the north is gonna win by the end of this chapter. Still, again, consider the first timer. They don't know this storm is coming, they don't know this is all gonna happen, so it really does rile you up at the beginning. Hey, here's my force of good, here they are heading to Winterfell, hang on if you can, Jane, help is coming. So that's very, very good. But even ignoring that, we get excited straight away because Asha, who we love to return to, is being guarded by a Mormon. We assume anyway it's a she-bear, so we normally assume that to be Mormons, which likely means we're going to get to meet another Mormon. We did talk about that in Jon's chapter where he read that Alysanne Mormont had joined her warriors to Stannis's, so we're probably thinking it's going to be her, and great, we get to revisit this awesome family, and we get to do it without including the dopey males, which is very, very good. Again, I won't go into that because we spoke about it last time, but that's already a hell of a note to kick off the chapter just on the first page here, isn't it? Aside from that, we have to establish that Asha has been reduced to a prize. She's a trinket that Stannis has brought along to show the other half of the north once he gets to Winterfell. He's won roughly half of it now. He thinks, I'm going to have to win this other half as well. How can I do that? I know, I'll present this symbol of having defeated the Ironborn. And we're going to be revisiting this idea throughout the chapter as Asha muses on it, but right away, it's just damning to see her like this, given how bright a star she is. We don't want to just reduce to a trinket, do we? Plus, the humiliation is intended to be public. Stannis wants to present her, wants to kind of gloat over his victory. And we suspect Asha to be mostly above such things, that kind of thing can't really wound her. But we also recently had to put up with similar her humiliation with the Kingsmoot, so we've got this on top now. Not very fun, is it? The next quote for you here. 300 miles as the raven flies. 15 days, the knights told each other. So bear that in mind because we're going to be repeating that. We're going to be seeing that a lot as we go through the chapters. It's a kind of constant mantra, and it's a very effective way of establishing how the confidence of this campaign will wear away the further we go. Or, to look at it a different way, it's the blind faith of how it's going to go, despite actual circumstances. Right now it's mixed up in that proud march with all the colours and the numbers. 15 days, that's not long, is it? A fortnight and then we're there. Okay, well, take that now, when it's all happy and we're all riding out. Take it in a few pages' time, when the storm is here, then we can see the difference. So it's a really effective technique there by George. And let's face it, 2 weeks, again, doesn't sound too bad, does it really? To cross half of the north, this massive, massive landmass, that's not too bad. 2 weeks and we'll be sitting in glory, happy in Winterfell having won the war. And yet, For some people, even that's not enough. Here's another quote for you. Robert would have done it in 10, Asha heard Lord Fell boasting. So we get a little bit of Robert's rebellion talk here, which is always nice to link back to because it's been a while, and, well, we do have a Baratheon brother here, so we always have to link that together, don't we? Fortunately, this is the kind of thing that Stannis always has to contend with. I don't think he doesn't hear this sort of talk as well. This constant comparison to Robert and this level that he can just never match. Whatever Stannis does, it's not going to happen. It's sort of annoying, really, that some still revere Robert in this way when we saw what he became. And it's likely bullshit as well. I doubt Robert would have been able to do it any faster, really. So that makes it even more annoying. Stannis is clearly a better military commander than his brother ever was, but like I say, he'll pretty much never live up to that reputation because Robert has been deified in a way, either by those who joined in with his victory, or those like Lord Fell who only wanted to be beaten by the very best. As soon as they're beaten, they have to say that guy's the best, or it makes them look weaker, doesn't it? So Stannis just can't win, which is pretty much the story of his life, isn't it? It's a matter of legend versus reality, and Robert can now never be held accountable to that reality because he's died, so Stannis just keeps on losing. And we know from previous books, from now, forever, how much this grinds on Stannis' soul, this unfairness of it all and how he is compared to Robert. And again, we're going to be revisiting that more and more in this chapter and Asha's next chapter as well. So that's another case of George really establishing key themes earlier on. And I've been thinking lately on Stannis' motivation to try and match Robert and how much the always being second best has affected his psyche. How much fuel that puts on the fire for him to go and do these huge campaigns and really kind of shoot for the sky type thing. And how he's never gotten his due credit. And that, I think we can all agree, plays into his motivation and his tactics also. So that's going to be present throughout and only get worse when things go bad, because magical Robert would have just hammered the snow into submission, supposedly. Of course, he was perfect. And if people believe that, then Stannis can't back down, can he? He's just got to keep going, no matter what the storm says. So keep that in mind for the end of the chapter, when we get to see some of that Stannis stubbornness really come out. I think Asha puts it best. She thinks this king lives in his brother's shadow, Asha thought. Again, that is nail on the head right there, isn't it? And to be fair, she would know, wouldn't she? Because such issues do dominate her own family too, in multiple generations. We've seen that a lot in House Greyjoy, and many other houses as well, but I think House Baratheon is probably the best example. We next revisit the fact that Asha was unfortunately injured back in the Battle of Deepwood Motte. That happened right at the end of her first chapter, that ankle. She's done something to it, whether she's got a really bad sprain, or well, she thinks she's broken something. Either way, it's not good, and that's just not cool for us after we saw her fighting ability in her last chapter. This does sound like a pretty bad injury, and with the lack of treatment and the rough road that she travels in the rest of this book, we do have to figure she's never going to be quite the same fighter, so that's pretty sobering for us, isn't it? That sucks. I guess she can still throw axes though, shouldn't affect that ability too badly, and she's pretty damn good at that, so bear that in mind. With that, we also get an update on what happened at Deepwood. We discover that only 9 of her 200 survived in the end, so again, yeah, really sobering. Now, it is tough to feel sorry for any Ironborn, but if we're going to, it's going to be for Asha's bunch, isn't it? And most importantly, we find that Triss and Carl also survived, and also that Asha was not raped in her capture, so again we can take some more solace in that. Now Asha reflects on how she took a lesson from her father, from Balon Greyjoy, and it's not often we get to say that sentence, is it? And it was actually some smart advice this time, as we revisit her yielding to Stannis at the end of the battle, and this idea that you can just rise up later when your enemies are dead. Now, that is missing the point that didn't really work for Balon, did it? But maybe Asha will do just that after Stannis fails. Besides, we know that's not really her main motivation. Her main motivation is saving whatever lives she can of her men, so because she's just that great, and that works, so well done her. Now, I do want to point out one quote just from this little passage that says, "He who will not kneel stays dead, stiff legs and all." I bring that up because it seems like a pretty damning line for the wildlings, the famous non-kneelers, and they are supposedly doomed, so yeah, that doesn't really work out, does it? So that worked. Asha went to the knee, she saved her people. Job done. And those people included Triss and Carl, like I said. So really, well, as Asha herself says, that was all she had left to care about. We already know she was kind of flagging in direction and motivation, but when it came down to it, it was her men, her people, her crew, as she thinks of them still, that mattered. That was still the case, and she saved them. So whatever it might have cost her, where she's going to be presented as, that was worth it. Now at the same time, when she made this submission, when she yielded, she also kind of did this analysis of Stannis, and we've got to say, she was pretty dead on, really. She identifies his courage, his determination, and his lack of true mercy. She specifically says the word justice, which is a word, as we mentioned earlier, we always associate with this man. It was his entire theme in the first couple of books there, wasn't it? The first couple of books he was in. So that's really great to see how Asha picks out those really key elements straight away. I'm pretty surprised that he did save all 9 of these surviving Ironborn. Then again, I suppose 9 out of 200 is pretty much the same as a complete blowout, and it still looks the same in the newspapers, which is what Stannis is majorly concerned with right now, so makes sense. As we mentioned back in that Jon letter a few Jon chapters ago, we know that this did work out. He was able to recruit more Northmen from it, so everybody wins. Besides, this is likely him wanting to recognise the formality of a surrender. This is an honour-laced part of battle and war, and therefore something Stannis is probably always keen to do properly. We know he's a stickler for the rules. If you surrender, you're afforded certain rights, and he's obviously kept to that. Now Asha continues with this analysis, and she recognises, again, the justice, but also the fury in Stannis, which is pretty much the 2 core elements that really make up him. So again, let's just give her a nod for really figuring this guy out straight off. The fury I want to concentrate on now, because that is certainly going to be boiling over as we get all the colder the further this trip goes. That's interesting to watch. Now I mentioned earlier on that Asha becomes very much a camera in this chapter, but to be honest that happens later. The further we go we see more of that. Right here at the beginning is where we get the most inner Asha stuff, so that's great. We need to really appreciate that while we can get it, and we do that now because she revisits this idea of her being presented as a prize. Now she believes that Stannis' taking her down would be of no use to the North because she is a woman. Now again, we know she's incorrect on that point, we've just said so. The victory was still impressive, and the North is desperate anyway. An enemy is an enemy right now, and they know what the Ironborn have cost them, so they both have already been impressed by Asha's defeat, and likely will be again when Stannis gets to the other Northerners at Winterfell, if he should. So she's mistaken on that part, but she's much more correct about her worth as a hostage for her own people. Now unfortunately, she's correct because she says she's not worth all that much. And we cry to the heavens, no Asha, of course you're worth everything that can be offered, but that is not how the Ironborn are going to see her. She knows her people, she knows the deal. They are much more likely to just turn their backs completely, aren't they? She's already considered an exile, and anyone who would really care about her is miles and miles away from the Isles now, and most of them probably quite like Asha being in chains, really. It solves a lot of their problems. Still, she does have some worth. She is still an asset. In fairness, Stannis is very, very unlikely to have made a deal with the Ironborn anyway, because he doesn't like deals, does he? And Euron would be near impossible for him to negotiate with. That's true for anyone, but especially for Stannis. But still, why wouldn't you keep Asha just in case she can be of use to someone in some point? Why not? Just keep her for a rainy day, especially if you have such overall dreams as Stannis does. Who knows what will occur, so like I say, just keep her in case. So we can see the logic in that. Asha also explores Stannis' relationships with women in this early page here. And again, we've got to say, she hits the nail on the head. Better than we ever have before, really. Now, when I initially read this chapter, I thought that this was the first time we've seen Stannis through a woman's eyes, and then Aziz, smart as he is with this great memory, corrected me. No, that is not true. We did actually see him through Catelyn's eyes way back in Clash of Kings, so thank you, Aziz, for providing my safety net there. Still, that was a very long time ago, wasn't it? A very, very long time. The majority of Stannis that we've seen is through the male gaze, so it is pretty interesting to get a female perspective now, given his weird relationship with the female gender. And to be fair, that wasn't what Catelyn was thinking about when she first met him, was it? Whereas Asha is focusing on that. And she lays it right out for us. She's astute as always. He is uncomfortable at the best of times. He is very possible asexual. Many people in the fandom have talked about that before. But whatever it is, he definitely has an issue with women in power or women taking on the warrior role. So Asha is something out of Stannis' nightmares, really. She does make sure to note that even the opposite, with Lady Sybil Glover, that is also something he's uncomfortable with. It's just women in general. But Asha really does represent everything that he doesn't like, really. I really hope he gets to meet Brienne at some point. That'd be cool. Now, I don't think I need to point out that this is obviously a very large minus in the Stannis column. Of course it is. Speaking of Stannis and women, well, that's quite a timely issue actually, because like I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to see Selyse later on, a long time since we've seen her, but we also followed that talk up with talk of Melisandre, the only woman that Stannis seems to be able to put up with, basically. And she is brought up by Sir Justin Massey, I'm sure you remember him, as he wishes that Melisandre had actually joined them on this journey, because the last time she didn't, it didn't go so well. Although in fairness, that is ignoring the victory at Deepwood-Winterfell, isn't it? But it does make you wonder what effect Melisandre would have on this march, especially when that storm does come down. Would she be able to save them from the worst of it with her fires or her magic or whatever she's got in the back pocket? Or would the faith in her take a hit? Would it reach an all-time low, as it turns out she's kind of powerless to do anything real against this kind of awesome northern power. It certainly would be the time for faith to fail in the face of cold. Remember, this storm is everything she hates, isn't it? This has come to rob her of her fire. It's cold, it's darkness. This is as anti-Melisandre as you get, as we discussed in her chapter earlier. So that would have been really, really interesting to see, but alas, we don't get to. So Justin Massey, who we're going to see quite a lot of in Asha's next 2 chapters, he's the first to introduce the kind of, hey, maybe we're not as confident as those first few pages made out, but he's not the last, because now actually Asha remembers, she revisits this debate on the march before it even began, and in doing so it allows us to look at the major split of Stannis' camp, the north versus the south. Yes, just like we also have in Winterfell as it happens. That's always been a key theme of the series, right from when we saw Robert Baratheon reach Winterfell. We've had that whole element, north versus south, very, very different people. And other than a very light version in Rob's army of Rivermen and Northerners, we've never really had them so at odds as this. And consider also that in Stannis' case, these are very southerners, mainly from the Stormlands and stuff like that, and they're very northerners with all the clan chiefs. So the differences are as clear as they can be. That could be attitude, knowledge, technique, opinion. They're all going to be at odds going forward here, before the march began and as it goes. But as Asha relays to us, the first difference is just whether they should have marched or not. The south says no in general. The north says yes, as we get introduced to those who make up the clan chiefs. And yes, I know you've all been waiting for it. This is where we get our first big bucket wall mention, as well as the other clan chiefs. But that's the one we're waiting for, isn't it? They demand that they need to go now. They need to get to Ned's girl. And that also happens to be the first mention of that fan favourite line. So that's again an idea that we love as pro-Stark readers. And plus, they are right. No one should be left to suffer Ramsay, whatever their name. Now, if it was publicly known that this was Jane Poole suffering through Ramsay's advances, would all these clan chiefs come? Well, we'll talk about that a little bit later, because there is an element that, yes, they would still come. They want to be here anyway, but obviously the Stark name is the big draw. We're not under any illusions about that. So we have the two sides bickering. We have the north saying that, this isn't too bad. It's only a small jaunt, really, across the north. We can do that. The south says, hang on, that's a massive expedition you're talking about. That's just a regional difference, because these 100 leagues, these 300 miles, as the raven flies, isn't a big deal to the north, because they're used to that just being the distance between things. If you want to go somewhere in the north, from place to place, generally, you're going to take a pretty large journey. In the south, that is not the case. If you want to go somewhere, the journeys are going to be much shorter. They're not used to journeys as large as this, so it's just part of the cultural difference. Because it is interesting to see. And even when it is eventually agreed that, yeah, they are going to have to march, we'd still see that the southern contingent is also split between them. Some of them do want to go, but some don't. And we get a lot of setup here for the future makeup of this part of the story. We revisit Sir Godry and his sheer confidence in R'hllor helping them out. We get another viewing of Justin Massey as the doubter. He tries to point out the logistics of a siege in this climate and against the strength of this castle, which no one else seems to be addressing. He seems kind of alone. They are all asking whether we can get there. He asks, well, hang on, what can we achieve if we do? And very importantly, we find out that much of the confidence they have in taking Winterfell is based on the combination of numbers they think it's coming from Arnulf Karstark and Mors Umber. And we as readers already know that theory to be full of holes. But there's also just this vast underestimation of Winterfell's ability to withstand siege towers and rams, combined with their vast overestimation of their ability to implement such. Now again, this is on both sides, mistakes being made here, but luckily Asha knows the score. She's being realistic about it all. Not that she gets a say, unfortunately. But in the end, the choice isn't really a choice. As Big Bucket himself points out, they can't stay at Deepwood. Anyway, there isn't the food, there's too many of them, and again, we see the cultural divide, because one of the Southerners says, we can just winter here, can't we? Because winter to them isn't that bad. It's bad, sure, but it's not nearly as bad as it's going to get here. They've got no idea the conditions and the amount of food they would need. So Big Bucket corrects him on that. And besides, you also can't really just head back to the wall. That's the wrong direction, and it sends a really wrong message. So onwards is the only option. And with that, we have more annoying comparisons of Robert yet again, as we get the quote from Stannis himself. I am not Robert, but we will march, and we will free Winterfell, or die in the attempt. So that's the stubbornness we were talking about earlier, but it's also pretty rallying, you gotta admit. It is pretty exciting, especially for us, the reader, that wants these people to get to Winterfell, that wants them to defeat the evil Boltons and save Jane and whoever else is there. So screw you, Robert, and your unfair comparisons and expectations. Stannis looks to be the man to actually get the job done. He's going to go through the nitty-gritty. And well, we're going to see the truth of that statement in a while, aren't we? On the brighter side, the small folk are big Stannis fans, even if all these lords are busy talking about his brother. Which is kind of funny when you imagine what meeting him face to face would actually be like for them. It's only by his reputation that they like him. The man himself, as we know, famously unlikable. What we have next is an interesting little piece of intrigue here, because we've just said that Justin Massey, he was the one saying, well, hang on, let's be rational, what can we actually do here? He was the doubter. But in the private conversation he later has with Asha, once we've got going here, now on the first day of this march, when he's talking to Asha on his own, he, maybe in an attempt to make himself feel better, maybe in an attempt to make Asha feel better, tells her that Stannis only needs to gain the upper hand on Roose just kind of once. Well, as soon as he gets there, the Bolton alliance is going to come crumbling down, as we ourselves have hypothesized many times before, so we can agree with that. But it's getting to that point that's the problem. It's an awfully big initial hill to climb. And it's Sir Justin that we focus on now, as Asha is told by Alysanne Mormont that he desires her. And Asha's just convinced that he wants her name and what he believes comes with it. And her reasoning is pretty sound of why that might be. And that is a theme we've seen lots up in Castle Black, with Jon having to think about these southern lords coming up and taking vow as their princess, as their bride, in order to further their station. So we're just moving the parts around here. It's the same deal, just lower down in the north. And besides, she's convinced that that would never even be an option, even if she were to accept him, even if she could return from exile somehow. She has now been defeated both politically and in battle, and the Ironborn put a lot of stock in such without much room for context, which is incredibly annoying because we know the truth of just how great Asha is. So the thought of all those chauvinistic Ironborn believing that they were right all along and that Asha was nothing, that women in general are nothing, yeah, it really does rub us the wrong way. Then again, we also know this would be forever doomed even if Asha did accept Justin and the Ironborn did accept Asha. Justin is dreaming if he thinks Asha would ever be the type he could rule through. We have seen more than enough evidence to contradict that. As much pride as we can take in that, it's a shame that Asha has already resigned herself to this fate. She was already worried about it enough in her first chapter, and now it's becoming reality. She is, after all, a realist, hence why she's happy to take whatever comfort Sir Justin can offer. It's just a shame for us that she knows home's not an option, victory in itself is not an option, and that's, well, it's obviously getting all the worse for her now that she's a prisoner, isn't it? That sense of melancholy gets even worse with the news that Triss and Carl and her other survivors have been left back at Deepwood Motte as prisoners of the North. Only Asha got to come along on this death march because of her supposed value. So that's gutting as well, because we know how much those two meant to Asha, Carl especially, and her whole crew. We've just discussed it. They were her whole focus of life, and she's away from them. Yeah, they're alive, that's great, she did well, but she's away, she's alone. And we can easily assume that at this point we'll never get to see them again. Asha will never get to see them again. And the huge loneliness she must feel only adds on to this dour atmosphere. And in fairness, I deserve a little bit of a slap on the wrist because we've been ignoring the woman who brought up this whole conversation of Justin Massey and what he might want in Alysanne Mormont, who again, we've heard about before, but now she's actually here on the page, and she's active. And she seems pretty awesome at the beginning. And we're already imagining how cool a kind of buddy duo team-up comedy with these two would look, even if it is going to take some time to break the ice. Now, like I said before, we've already talked about how good it is to get back to House Mormont, and we've seen Daisy, and we've seen Mage, and we've heard about Lyanna, so this is just another one. How is this one going to turn out to be cool? Well, we'll have to wait a few more pages to get a better look yet, but she is here, she's around, so that's exciting. For now, the grand mood from the opening pages continues as the march experiences success at the beginning. They cover nearly 50 miles in 2 days, and that isn't bad at all. Everyone's in a good mood and they're feeling confident still, so this is good. We readers, being veterans of George, think that such early prosperity is sure to point to hardships later on, but for now, Stannis' bunch are drunk on purpose and self-confidence, especially the large contingents of those who follow R'hllor. They are extra loud in the beginning here, allowing Asha to analyse the camp and the characters of this new storyline even more, which is useful for us. Jon gave a setup for meeting most of these characters, but they are much more prominent now, and Asha has been given major responsibility for taking charge of this whole storyline, one of the most important for the whole book, so we need a lot of that setup. Case in point, we get a better look at Godry Farring. He, who we already run into in Castle Black, we already know that he's a massive dick from what we saw of his interactions, of basically just trying to bully Jon or be an idiot about Northerners, plus he killed a giant, so yeah, we do hate him. But Asha crucially points out the finer details of how bad a person he is. He's pretty much got bad qualities all over, and especially has some awful fixations of women, which we really do want to keep an eye on, especially considering the red flags we've had from recent chapters of Jane. Unfortunately, that whole theme is just a bit too prominent right now. So again, Asha is just being kind of astute. She really does know how to analyse these people because, well, she's dead on about Godry as well, and unfortunately he's going to be more prominent than we would like going forward. From there, though, it's back to Justin and Alysanne. Mainly, we're focusing on Alysanne here, because Asha, she asked Justin for a horse. She feels like they have a close enough connection to even broach that subject. That doesn't work, but just bringing that up incites a bit of contention between Alysanne and Asha about basically the North versus the Ironborn. Unfortunately, they are fairly far from that best bud comedy that we're hoping for initially. Despite their similarities of how they are as women, defying the societal norms that are pushed on their gender in this society, the chasm of culture still stretches between them, and Asha is getting lumped in with Theon for the crimes of Winterfell. Now, some of that is fair in that these two siblings were both part of the same invasion force, but obviously the specific crimes that are being talked about here that bother the Northmen so much, that turning of cloaks, has nothing to do with Asha. And we know that, Alysanne doesn't so much, and it's hard to blame her really. But that does get Asha thinking on baby bro for the first time. And we kind of click here, oh, hang on, they are actually heading towards each other, or Asha is heading towards Theon at least. We might have a reunion on the cards here. And considering this would be a second reunion for them, there'd really be no better comparison for how things have changed in this world. Recall that Clash chapter where Theon meets Esgred. The sheer hilarity of it is one of the best chapters in the whole series for me. But then compare that to where we are now. The change couldn't be more stark really. Rereaders know we will get that reunion, even if we only have a hint of it in this book, but it won't be in the format that we currently assume here. Asha, for her part, is convinced it will never happen anyway. She knows that Theon has been tortured and is held by Northmen who hate him. Riding his way is a gigantic force of more Northmen who also hate him, so it's just easier for her to assume the worst, as tragic as that would be for poor Alanis Harlaw. Now we took a detour for Theon there, but we're not leaving Alysanne either, because thinking of siblings leads Asha to probe Alysanne about her own family, which is a stab to us as we have to remember the fate of poor Daisy again. Ah dear. Though it is helpful to put it into context, because it is easy to forget by this point that we did spend a lot of time with Alysanne's sister and mother back in the day, like we mentioned. When Asha brings up the Red Wedding, there seems to be a moment where Alysanne is debating whether she wants to make this connection with a prisoner, an enemy that she's been put in charge of, merely because of her gender, thank you Stannis. How much does she really want to humanise Asha? Well, Alysanne decides to slowly go for it as she tells of her own children, her son and her daughter. Now that doesn't mean they are instant buds straight away. More so, they are just the product of ancient societal lines, both forged by each other's histories in a way. Still, there is a connection there over what is shared, however it came about from mistakes of the past. Asha thinks of the old way, the thing that she tried to end, remember, and there's the sense of unfairness again, but we also have the seeds of a future friendship, so watch this space essentially. So the journey continues, and they go past signs that Asha recognises from her previous journey to Winterfell just to keep that Theon theme alive. George goes out of his way to point out their surroundings and landmarks and what can be seen, because soon enough it's all going to be replaced with just sheer white. We had that in Theon's chapter last week, that bleak wall around Winterfell that gave away absolutely nothing. We're going to get it again. And that can have a real impact on the senses and on mood, and Asha is definitely on her way to finding that out. Even as she laments her failed attempts to save Theon the last time she came this way, which we remember was absolutely not her fault, the march still gets 14 miles on the third day. Not as good as the previous two, but still pretty good. Which is what I'm sure they're all nervously telling each other as we get the hint of just how disastrous this chapter is going to turn out. Before we get to that, we get more analysis of Stannis when the camp breaks and Asha gets to dine in the King's Pavilion. She has this quote, "Yet there was power in his stare, an iron ferocity that told Asha this man would never, ever turn back from his course." That's a great line for any fans of Stannis. It's something that many people admire about him, and it does stir the juices a bit, especially when he's doing something that again lines up with our own wants, the liberation of Winterfell and the saving of Jane. We want to hear that he's never ever going to turn back. But there's also just that little hint of that ending up as a bad quality of Stannis's, whether it's here on this march or later on. Surely this dedication is going to end up being a cost instead of a profit at some point. It is then that Asha makes her attempt to at least win the freedom and pride of not wearing chains. And again, we speak about this seemingly every week. How often do chains come up in this book? More and more. And she goes for that by trying to persuade Stannis that she might be of use in one way or another. Is that admitting that she was at fault? No, that's not going to do it. Is it offering her men and her ships? No, not really. What about Dagmare Cleftjaw and Torrance Square? Well, that one was half a hope anyway, but Stannis isn't interested. In fact, he says this: "It is Winterfell that matters. Strike off these irons and let me help you take it, sire. Your Grace's royal brother was renowned for turning fallen foes into friends. Make me your man." Now, we've already said plenty of times in this chapter, Asha is smart and shrewd, but unfortunately she is not perfect, as she displays by bringing up the two subjects almost guaranteed to ensure that Stannis will not listen: Robert and then her gender. This is already the third time that we've brought up a comparison between Robert and Stannis in this chapter alone. He absolutely does not want to hear what Robert would have done, and if anything, it's more likely to make him do the opposite, foolish and immature as that may be. Furthermore, painting herself as a man, even as a figure of speech, is a big no-no with this guy, which is obviously a problem going far beyond foolishness or immaturity. This is a real mark against Stannis' character and his ability to rule. He might be right that Asha can't really offer much at the moment, but turning her down because she's a woman is beyond reprehensible. It's an incredibly strange attitude that obviously goes beyond the mere possibility of asexuality. He seems to want the world to just not include women whatsoever if he could help it. If he gets his hand on the affinity gauntlet, that might be the 50% that gets lost with the snap, and especially does not want them in his beloved war camps. This, again, will surely cost him if it hasn't already. Asha does realise this. She chides herself for her choice of words, or about the brothers at least, not the gender thing, and thinks on how the relationship and interaction of being a brother is a lifetime affair. As we said earlier, there's no bigger example of that than the 3 Baratheon brothers, but we have seen plenty of the same all over Westeros if we're being honest. Now then, it's all been very good so far, but this is where it really starts to get interesting. This is where the turning of the chapter starts. And it begins subtly, just as we're told that the highborn are eating venison, whereas the general soldiers get a chunk of sausage and the last of the ale, and that's already run out on day 3. So just bear that in mind. That's a small detail, but it all counts. Much more importantly, we get that constant reminder again. 100 leagues from Deepwood to Winterfell, 300 miles as the raven flies. Well, in the first 3 days we've covered a little less than quarter of that, but the 4th day is when that little tinkle of snow comes down. It's probably quite pretty at the beginning, we can maybe imagine. A few twisting flakes in the air. Maybe it's even a first time novelty for some of the southerners. But then the flakes keep coming, and coming, and coming. And after 3 days of the stuff, the novelty has been replaced by reality. Already these marches are frozen, covered in snow, and they're starting to suffer. On the 3rd day of snow, the difference between the north and south moves from theoretical to physical. For the Northmen, this is a gloomy afternoon. For the Southerners, they've seen nothing like it already, just 3 days in. That means one group struggles far more than the other. The ones who are used to this and have the equipment to deal with it, do so. The ones who don't. So we quickly see how much of a logistical nightmare this is actually going to be. Remember, this is a long column of an army with limited communication abilities, now coming apart in a climate that reduces visual capability and the transport of information. There's a whole host of things this messes up if left to fester. The organisational structure is already coming apart, and that affects food distribution, who reports to who, setting up camp, everything. It really does encompass everything. This could very easily become chaos within hours. Plus, it just makes the Northmen seem cooler than the Southies, which is already playing into our bias. Most of us are pro-North generally because that's where our story started, that's where the starts come from. So George knows how to play that. And really that's just the beginning. From there, the whole thing becomes a snowball, growing larger and larger with each rolling paragraph. First is that disorganisation. Then comes that change to your field of input that we mentioned a moment ago, was everything turns white, you can't see anything more. That starts coming into play. A minute ago, you could see everything. Now it's all snow. As the baggage train discovers when they cross a frozen pond that they didn't know was a frozen pond, and it cracks underneath their weight. Men and horses fall in, and you'd think at least some supplies as well, along with hardwood fell, who we mentioned earlier. You can't spare any of these commodities, whether it be food or men. You need both. You need them all. So the storm has claimed its first victims, but not its last. Now, Hardwood Fell, we hardly knew him as a character before he died, but he did die as a result of trying to save his men from drowning, so that's worth noting. We should give him credit for that. It's a shame he's also chums with people like Clayton Suggs. That kind of lowers him back down the scale a little bit. And it also means if this ever comes to a battle of Hardwoods between Stannis and Roose, then Stannis is now 1-0 down, because there is still a Hardwood over in Winterfell. So again, let me just remind you, we're 3 days in, and we're far from the worst that the storm has to offer, and the Southies have already had enough. The Queen's men are already beginning to blame the Northern gods, which deepens that divide between the two factions, as they claim that R'hllor will save them, and for that, they need to burn a sacrifice. And surprise, surprise, it's Godry Giantslayer and Clayton Suggs that are the loudest in this, with Justin Massey again being the doubter. Now Asha is smart enough to realise that though Stannis does not endorse the idea publicly, he is thinking, and it's clear an idea is already forming in his mind. He will not balk. She said it herself, and so did he, no matter the course, even if it means burning men alive and truly marrying himself to R'hllor. I think he's resisting, because again we've already discussed, he doesn't want to share the credit. I don't want to have to do that unless I really have to, but if I really have to, so it's already kind of a ticking time bomb there, as we're obviously going to revisit a lot more in Asha's 3rd chapter. For now, it is still statements of confidence that they'll be through the worst soon enough, only for that to be repeatedly false as the chapter, if I'm honest, now just descends into further misery. Winds as cruel as a whip, a cold that drives men mad, a storm that makes every single second of life that much more difficult. George loves the details and he dives into them here as he focuses on how difficult it is to raise a tent or light a fire or keep a fire going. Even the Queen's men can't sing with the same energy that they did earlier on as their night fires dim. And it probably doesn't help that the mountain clans act as though this isn't even winter yet. That really is rubbing it in your face if you're a Southie. Now, we do love those overall details just like George, but let's take it back to Asha for a second. She's a chained prisoner, but she's the king's chained prisoner. And that is a better spot to be in than some of the actual free people, in this context at least, as we see that tensions are boiling over and people begin to argue and kill over little tiffs, to say nothing of the poor horses. Losing horses, they're losing food, they're losing faith rather quickly. It's all building up here very, very quickly, even if Asha herself does get food and warmth for now. For Stannis, there is chattering in both ears. Most of the south wants to stop and make camp. All of the Queen's men want a sacrifice to please the law, and Stannis has to clamp his jaw in resistance to both. To stop is to condemn themselves to death, or, much worse in Stannis' opinion, defeat. To burn is to turn away from all the extra men he's won in the non-believers, and like I said, he doesn't want to share those victories with some fire god when he's already spent half of his life not being appreciated for Robert. We established that early on, that's why George is mentioning it so much. So Stannis does not listen, and neither does the drowned god, as Asha finds her position so precarious she's even praying to the deity of her own home now. Neither of them provide an answer though, as the storm stretches to 9 days, and we can see just how progress has been pretty much dismantled. A reminder, they covered nearly 50 miles in the first 2 days. Now we're down to 5 miles a day, then 3, then 2. I don't think I need to explain to you. The mood and the desperation, the painful crawl of this march is being made horribly obvious to us. Think about it, really, this is one of the very last chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire you'd ever want to find yourself in, especially when the deaths start mounting. What it does do is give you a little bit more respect for the Night's Watch. Remember, they were making a retreat march in very similar conditions, except they also had ice monsters coming out of the shadows to snag the stragglers. Shout out to Sam and Gren. Maybe we'll see the same being repeated south of the wall at some point in the future, who knows. For now, the atmosphere becomes even dimmer as we begin the nefarious cold count, where everyone gets together and talks about who died. And it's pretty bad already, here at the beginning. Multiple men and horses are dying all over the place. Some are getting lost, and that's essentially a death sentence. And some of the supplies are going with them. The immensely valuable baggage train that they, again, really need is slowing down, and that's just the beginning. Later on, the cold count is going to be, quite frankly, ridiculous in Ash's 3rd chapter. Make no mistake, these people are already in a battle. Well, half of them are anyway. The super cool Northies still haven't lost anyone because they respect winter, they know what it's about. Yet, the earlier summary of Stannis stays true. The horses founder in the snow, Justin Massey told the king. Men wander off or just sit down to die. Let them, King Stannis snapped. We press on. Wowzers. It's harsh, sure, maybe harmful in the long run, but then again, what are his options? He is in an incredibly tough position. He can't give in to his men's wants because in the end it's going to be worse for them. He has to bear the responsibility of dragging these people forward to, well, whatever's in the future, whether it's salvation or death or whatever, it's up to him. So there is a big, big weight on his shoulders. And we can really see that because the march now extends to 2 weeks. We had just under a quarter of the total distance covered in 2 days, but now they're still less than half after 2 weeks. So that really puts into perspective how their progress is basically deadened. They're slow, they're dying, and Asha laments that she can't even see the stars. Like her brother, the storm basically has them boxed in now. That's how much it's moved in. Even while they are moving, it seems like they are not. So every day is just exactly the same. Every day you wake up and it's just this blanket, this wall of snow. And really we can't overstate the huge mental toll that takes, as well as the physical obviously, and the cold and the weariness. There's another 5 days after that. And at least this time it brings one small change. No more fetters for Asha. Unfortunately, we learn that's no great change of heart on Stannis' part, it's just mere logistics. One of the horses drawing Asha's wain succumbed to the cold, and no more can be spared, so Asha must now walk on that bum ankle of hers. It's painful, it's humbling, it's weakening. So now we really do have to start worrying about our favourite. She's got this horrible injury that we don't want in the first place, but she's also in this terrible scenario where those king's comforts, they're wearing thin. She's getting cold, she's getting hungry, just like everyone else. She's in a really dangerous position. And that only becomes worse. That release of the chains, the release from the fetters, happens on day 20. So remember at the beginning, they said 15 days. This is 20. They were supposed to reach their goal, reach Winterfell, 5 days ago. They haven't. And then another week passes, and the veggies run out. They've got no more vegetables left. And then another week passes, and no more Winterfell still. They're a full month into this march, which is more than double the amount of time it's supposed to take. And that's when the grain goes as well. Let me repeat for you. A month. A full month of walking or riding, when only 3 of those days have been without snow. Now, we've all had storms, I'm sure, but I very much doubt there's many of us that have ever had a month full of constant snow. And if we have, it probably hasn't been full of people and horses dying every day, the wind and the cold getting worse, the severe lack of progress, and the lack of food. It means they're all weak and fatigued and starving before they're supposed to fight a mighty battle at the end of all this. And it's now time to not beat around the bush, is it? This is a disaster, an unmitigated disaster. There's nothing else to call it. This is as bad a military campaign as we've ever seen on these pages. The march from Deepwood to Winterfell isn't small, but it's not huge either, and yet the forces of Stannis Baratheon have been drained away. They've had their morale shattered, they're malnourished, exhausted, and in absolutely no state to fight anyone. And all this without the enemy lifting a finger. It is a disaster, honestly. We've never seen anything like it. And imagine how that burns at Stannis. Even with his many victories, you know this is what people will remember. It's what have you done for me lately, not what have you done before. Of course, you might not be around to witness it, because this also happens to be the biggest part of your royal campaign yet. Lose this, and it's pretty much over. And none of it is really his fault. That's even more annoying. You can't compete with the weather. Yes, it was his choice to kick all this off when he left the wall, but still. And most annoyingly, it makes Roose Bolton look like a genius. Everything he hoped for, everything he predicted, has come to pass. So where does that leave us as readers? What about that excitement we had at the beginning? George, what are you playing at? We need this. We know what's going on in Winterfell. We really need saviours to come riding through the snow. And, I mean, you're kind of making it look like that's not going to happen, George. Come on now. Now, in fairness, we knew the dangers and the risks. They were laid out for us, but every first-time reader secretly figured that we were being told about the evils inside Winterfell, specifically so we could see them be undone and the North would be won back. I thought this is what this book was going to be, George. It would be a difficult road, sure, but we would get there. And we figured Asha was given to us as a camera for exactly that, a pairing with her brother so two Ironborn could see the consequences of their original kingdom-breaking efforts. But now it seems, no, that's not going to happen, at least not like this. We simply can't imagine this force having any chance whatsoever against Winterfell. So like with Davos before, we start thinking, oh damn, is George cruel enough to make us watch the Boltons win? No, come on, surely not. But then we can never be too sure with this guy, can we? Unsurprisingly, these difficulties lead to a split, or many splits really, within Stannis' camp. There's an argument that the weak must be left behind or all will perish. There's confidence that only R'hllor can save them. And most of all, as we suspected, there is the North versus the South, as the Southies begin moaning that this was all a bad idea in the first place, and they're doing it for nothing of worth in Arya Stark. Ned's girl, said Morgan Liddell. Ned's girl, echoed Big Bucket Wall. It's beyond me if you don't love these guys. We've had all 5 books littered with evidence of how special Eddard Stark was as a leader, how his legacy has lived on, how brilliant he was. But you'll be hard-pressed to find any better examples of this right here. Everything, all the hardship of this storm is all worth it for Ned, according to these men, according to these clan chiefs. It brings a tear to their eye, honestly. This is what the North is saying back to the Southerners. Yes, this is hard. Yes, this is horrible, but it's worth it for Ned's girl. Again, it really hits you right there. The rest really is just back and forth between South and North again. Corlys Penny even suggests that the clan chiefs are turncloaks, which is ironic given that there are turncloaks around, whereas Big Bucket says that they'd be at Winterfell by now without the Southies slowing them down, etc, and around it goes. And all of that leads to Big Bucket Wall's wonderful speech about how he and his men will end in battle. Because this is winter and death is coming, and some deaths are better than others, he says. And they believe they're headed for the best and with the best possible cause. As he starts talking about bathing in Bolton blood and all these things that we do kind of really want to see. Now this is what I mentioned earlier about, does that dampen their point about Ned's girl if they're already thinking they're going to lose and they're kind of using it as an excuse a little bit to do this northern thing of giving the younger people a chance and whatever else? Well, maybe there's a percentage about that, but I think we all really just want to focus on the Ned's girl bit and their motivation. And certainly, that's what gets focused on now. That and the battle, as all of them get riled up and shouting. They all start saying blood and battle, and all the noise comes, even as the Southies are shivering and thinking these guys must be mad. But we see that northern passion, that northern spirit come through, because this is what they're all about. This is true winter. This is what they've been forged by. This is their solar energy, I suppose. And it's the most energy we've seen on this march in weeks, so we really can't complain. And even Asha finds herself caught up in the notion. So there is a use to it. Now, as we come to the chapter's end, finally the group comes upon something they need in the worst of ways. Shelter. Shoddy shelter, an abandoned crofter's village, but it may as well be a palace after the march they've just had. It can't even fit everyone in, but there's at least a chance to rest, a slim hope of being very slightly warm, and even the potential of fish in the lake to sustain them. All of that is sorely needed and needs to be taken advantage of. especially when you are scarcely moving half a mile a day now, and the back end of your column is apparently hours and hours behind your front. At the very least, you can just regroup, can't you? Now, Stannis isn't happy about it, but he agrees to 1 night's rest, which is almost laughable. So his obsession is clear as pie here. We really do go back to the early parts of the chapter where we're talking about no mercy and he won't stop for whatever. Even after we've just described how bad this storm is, we've just had a whole half a chapter about it, he's still saying, alright, you can have 1 night. 1 night. Okay. It's during this declaration that Asha notes that Stannis himself is not in a good shape. Like after the Blackwater, he is thinner than ever. He is taut as you like, and the guy is tense. Some of that we know to be stress and tension and whatever else, but we also know from Stannis' history that he's not one to put himself above others. If other people start to starve and feel the cold, he's going to do the same. He is a man of the people, a man of his army at least, so we've got to give him credit for that. So the army, if you want to still call them that, settled in for the night, and yet when the morning comes there is nothing, just silence. And Asha, unnerved by such, goes investigating. It turns out that horrific march wasn't even the worst the storm had to offer. Somehow there's still more. We've now reached a completely new level, as the woods and the lake, the very tents that they put up in this crofters village, have all disappeared under a brand new level of snow. Pretty much the only thing that can be seen is the dim flame atop the king's tower, and even that is fading. Take that for whatever symbolism you like. The storm is strong enough to silence the order of Stannis Baratheon. It's more than a night they stay here, they are stuck. We have this ending quote. Somewhere ahead, Roose Bolton awaited them behind the walls of Winterfell, but Stannis Baratheon's host sat snowbound and unmoving, walled in by ice and snow, starving. So again, I mean, what else can we call it? It is disaster. Disaster on all levels, laid out as detailed as you like by George here. It's a wonderful chapter for all those details and considering all angles, as it so often is. But for us, we have to worry. What is to become of Asha, or Stannis, or Jon's investment in the campaign? What about those within Winterfell waiting to be saved? What about the war for the North in general? We don't want Winterfell to end up with the Boltons. We don't want that ending for our story. Sort it out, George, and it seemed to be going the opposite direction. And again, I mentioned, we were warned. We've always been told that winter is coming. Well, this is the chapter that announces it's not coming, it is here among us, and it will not be stopped. Still, we have to wonder, George, why did you have to put Asha in this? She had no quarrel with the North. But did she? Because, again, that first chapter, The Wayward Bride, it was all about Asha versus the North. Well, now we're really seeing what the North can give you. And we're really seeing what is going to happen. I mean, yeah, winter has come, but it's going to keep coming. This kind of thing can last for years and years. It's probably going to get worse and worse. This is the setting we can expect now for the next 2 books, probably, after the one we're already in. At the very least, I think we're all in agreement the Winds of Winter is going to look like this quite a lot, hence the title. So we're going to use that word sobering. Again, it's just a sobering chapter. All of our hopes are, well, they look in a pretty bad shape. Half the men have been lost. More are going to go in Asha's 3rd chapter. We've still got to consider the fatigue, the malnourishment, how in the world they're actually going to fight a battle. It looks bad. It looks real bad. We're very keen to find out how or if this can get any better, because that's what we want. And we really want Asha to succeed in herself. So we've really got a lot riding on this, and we do have a little wait, unfortunately, until the next Asha chapter. So George is really putting us on a bit of a cliffhanger. Still, it is an Asha chapter, and you know I love them. I really do think this is one of the best, just for how George presents this terrible disaster coming and how the storm wins. We're going to get a lot more of that in The Sacrifice in Asha 3, so I'm really looking forward to that one personally. And it's a hell of a start to the episode, isn't it? So with all that cold and snow talk, we probably need a break and we want to go somewhere warm for a little bit of a holiday. And luckily, I can provide you that now as we head over to Essos, to Meereen, for Daenerys VII. Now it seems like every time we have a Daenerys chapter, I say something to the effect of, things are building, things are getting worse for Daenerys. And, well, there's a reason for that, it's because it's true. And normally in every chapter there's some kind of small payoff, there's something new to hurt Daenerys. But now we reach a rather big one, probably the largest consequence she's had so far of all these building bad things. As we reach what is very much a new level in what's going on in Meereen. This is a real different state of affairs that we're about to reach here. But that's not until the end. Before that, we're going to have all the build-up, all the bad vibes around the expectation of what's going to happen to Dany here. Luckily, to at least mix with that a little bit, because like with all Dany chapters, this isn't a very fun one for her. She's not going to feel great about herself or about what's going on. We do at least get a very important distraction in the re-emergence of Quentyn and the biggest moment in his quest so far. Now, this is obviously a little bit of a weird bit for George because, like I say, this is the most important part of this POV's journey, but we're not going to see it from his POV. We haven't seen Quentyn for a little while now in his own POV. We're not going to for a little while yet. For now, we're going to see it all through Dany's eyes, and that's pretty interesting in its own way because we've not seen Quentyn around others yet. He's been very isolated in Volantis, and then in Astapor he's not been around people that we know or that in any situation that we're really familiar with. So now he's placed right into the thick of it, right into the thick of the Meereenese knot and everything else. Now we can really put him in some context. We can understand, okay, he's dreamer in some respects. He's kind of batting above his weight. I'm not talking about Daenerys there, I'm talking about what he's trying to get achieved. So how is that actually going to work out in this political minefield of Essos and the wider world? This also plays very well with last week's chapter. We got our one glimpse of dawn there, so we've really got all that kind of dawnish vibes flowing through our blood right now, even if the Arianne/Duran stuff is very much separate to the Quentyn stuff. It all ties in together eventually. So now we want to see something. What is going to happen here? And Quentyn is going to provide us the one slim hope for getting what we want for Dany, even if it's going to prove actually, no, the Meereenese knot is going to win out. Duty is going to compel Dany further than Quentyn does. But that's all to come. Let's go right into it. Like I said, we were cold, we were shivery of the snow. Well, luckily, those sons of Eastern Essos are right on the horizon as we enter the chapter just before dawn. So that's lucky for us, but unlucky because dawn is the last thing that Daenerys Targaryen wants at the beginning here. So, oh dear, monarchs are having a pretty rough time of it in the first two chapters of today's episode, aren't they? Dany, for her part, has been cherishing the night. She does not want to face the day. And based on her arc so far, that could be for any number of reasons, couldn't it? Would you want to wake up and face what she has to, even in her opening chapter? Let alone what's come since, the clawing and the whining, the manipulation and the demands. That was all when it was easy. More lately, we've had guilt over one's own nature, the threat of war and siege, the diseased and the desperate that you've had to turn your back on, the concessions to a city and a people that you hate, and, probably the most painful, the betrayal of friends you trusted in, without even talking about how the entire continent wants to come and kill you and undo all you've done. So no, Dany probably doesn't want to get up, and we can't really blame her. But it turns out the reason is even more specific on this particular morning. Dany is still immersed in the delights that she finally let herself enjoy after her incredibly difficult chapter last time out. If you'll remember, that was the one that ended with her saying, okay, we're going to have to abandon the Astapori, and we had the betrayal of Brown Ben Plum on top of that, so she took what comfort she could in the form of Daario Naharis. And he has been of great relief to her since, both physically and emotionally. And now she thinks she's about to lose all that. The fun between the sheets, the distraction from her many problems, the freedom to do what she wants for a change instead of what she has to. And we discussed last time out how valuable that was for her, for anyone. Remember that the general idea growing up is that those in charge do what they want. Dany has found the opposite, as most people do. Remember that was a key theme introduced to us right at the beginning with Robert Baratheon, how being in charge isn't all it's cracked up to be. In Dany's case, she's found that, and Daario has been her one great relief. If he goes, so does the good stuff, allowing the bad to come back in. Now luckily, even though it sounds like Dany is putting Daario up on kind of a pedestal at the moment, she doesn't completely just give in to this guy being awesome in all facets. We have a quote here. He has a sellsword's conscience, she realised then, and that is to say, none at all. So at least we know she's not completely delirious, and this is a good lesson to learn about sellswords, even if the lesson from Ben Plum was harsh as well. And you have to wonder, at this early point, just to take a slight juncture here, I wonder how this prejudice against sellswords is going to serve her when she meets Tyrion and Penny and Jorah again. All of them are going to be sellswords by the end of this book, remember, so well, we've still got that to look forward to in Winds, haven't we? The other reality that Dany holds on to is an intensely sad one. She treasures Daario so much that she would give up the crown to spend her life with him. So we're back to worrying again about how much she likes this guy. Even with the fact that this crown has brought nothing but woe, that is quite the claim, isn't it? And it's definitely not what we want as readers. But the truly sad part is that she knows he does not feel the same. He treasures her for that crown, not for Daenerys herself. Is there anything more pitiful? Is there anything more annoying to us? How woeful it is that Daenerys, as amazing a person you can find, is not valued as such. It really, really makes you want to give this Daario fool a kick in the shin. He's one of the luckiest souls in the world, and he doesn't even know it, or at least appreciate it. So Dany, our hearts go out to you right here on the first page. And again, it links in with the theme we've had a lot lately. Whether it's Val, whether it's Asha, let's not kid ourselves, we've seen this across the entire series. Women are seen as commodities, not just for the baby making purposes that we've discussed lots of times before, but also just as a doorway, as a stepping stone to better titles or better lands or whatever it might be. A lot of men see them as doorways rather as living human beings. So that is intensely sad across the board, isn't it? That all these women are just not appreciated or even seen as people, or, I mean, we could go into that for a long time because it angers the blood, doesn't it? Yeah. But especially for all these people like Asha that we know, or Daenerys who we know to be awesome and amazing and out to better the world, and all that people see, not all people, but all that a lot of people see, men see, is, hey, how can I get some benefit out of this? Fuck you, stupid idiots. But leaving that aside, we are left to wonder why it's specifically this day that the one-sided romance must end, as Daenerys tries to draw in as much Daario as she can before the sun comes to steal it from her. And yes, we can have a little bit of double meaning in the sun there, just as Quaithe likes to do. But arrive the sun does, and Daario finally provides the reason for us why Dany is so intense early on in not wanting the sun to rise. It's because we are now 2 days away from Daenerys' wedding day. That takes us back, first of all, because remember, we already saw one Daenerys wedding right at the beginning of the series. So that's a long stretch back through time, but it's also a hell of a double whammy to start the chapter with. Dany is losing the man she loves, but who doesn't love her back, and is gaining a man she doesn't love, and who also doesn't love her back. We've already covered how emotionally draining and embarrassing this whole wedding is in previous chapters. It's that signal of surrender to the Meereenese and the people, and Daenerys hates the way she's been cornered into it, and so do we. Again, the blood is boiling. Yes, maybe it is needed, but that doesn't make it any more enjoyable. So now Daario speaks to what we've just discussed. Queens are supposed to be able to do what they like, he says. That's why so many people try so hard to be one, or a king in other cases. So if you have that power, then just sack Hizdahr off and marry him, he suggests. Dany knows that is impossible, but we can still be wistful about the thought. As much success and progression as she's had since Khal Drogo's death, she's also been missing something that no one save Daario has awakened. Now that is her sexuality on one level, as we've discussed previously. Dany is a very sexual person and is entering that part of her life, but a lot of it is also spiritual. Again, she's been flattened by all these recent circumstances of Meereen, and he was the lone pleasure. And we can doubt Daario as much as we like, because the guy does seem dodgy, but we also have to appreciate anything that brings Dany even a little happiness, because we know it's in short supply. But seriously, the guy is dodge. He loves Dany for her crown, like she's just told us. He's more than happy to join in for her sexual needs, and he's more than likely just fishing around for his own route to a throne. He's using her, basically. And he's making a mockery of her court as we get in this little flashback scene, which we do have to love Sir Barristan for, because he's aware of how Dany's station and prestige is weakened by such, and he tears them apart. So good guy Barry for that. Back in the present, Daario suggests another arrangement. Marry Hizdahr, but keep him on as concubine. He still gets all his benefits, and Hizdahr could always be dealt with at a later time, as we're sure he would be. But Dany turns that down too, and we get more lessons of how infatuated she is with him as he begins the whole passive-aggressive thing on how annoyed he is at this turn-up. He gives a little temper tantrum as he tries to get under her skin about all these other things that are digging away at her, like the children that are outside, the children she's promised to save, and all these kind of things that he knows is really important to her. He knows what buttons to press, I think. And it's also revealed to us that Dany is kind of being defiant at the moment. Being a queen sucks so much lately that she's letting Hizdahr all but rule in her name for now. We know how dangerous that line of thinking can be, and that she needs to keep her sense of self. She needs not to be swayed by either Hizdahr or Daario here, because they're both trying to bring her off course. But we're actually pretty quickly distracted from such questions when Daario brings up the frog, the Dornish boy, who apparently has some gift for her. So that starts to get us very, very excited that we might finally see these two storylines merge, and Quentyn will finally reappear and enter this already complicated glut in Meereen, like we mentioned at the top. Amongst more flirting and teasing from Daario, she agrees to meet with this frog and to bring all the Westerosi that Daario has collected to court the following day. At least she can submerge herself in the feeling of Westerosi people before embarking on her very Meereenese marriage. So when Daario leaves, Dany's little bubble finally pops, and she's forced to think about her true circumstances. They're still surrounded, more and more soldiers are now actually disembarking on her shore, there's catapults and trebuchets being built. Everything that was theoretical before is now very, very real. We've been hearing all about this for several chapters now, but they're actually here, they're viewable from the walls. And even as she thinks that they're not building battering rams or anything like that, they're not going to come in and take them, they're just going to let them rot behind the walls if they really need to, whether by famine or disease or whatever they want to die by. If this wedding doesn't go ahead, if she doesn't choose Hizdahr, that is what awaits with certainty. I mean, there's no way out now. So it's quite the reminder of why she's doing this stupid wedding she wants no part of. It's peace. Peace is the only option. Hizdahr is the only option. Not that settles her soul any, as we see when she dreams this kind of weird dream about Hizdahr and sleeping with him for the first time, and him feeling as cold as ice. Now, every time we have a dream that involves anything to do with ice, we of course think, oh, I wonder if this is connected to the endgame in any way, if this is connected to the others, because that's just how we're conditioned as readers, and maybe it does, but we've not really got time to look into that too deeply. Nothing obvious comes up. I think basically we're just meant to see Dany doesn't want to do this. It doesn't feel natural. She is a fire. She's a dragon. So anything of ice, of cold, that is not what is natural. That's not what she wants. As if we needed a reminding. Even as the day progresses and Daario eventually returns, Dany finds no relief. Instead, she can only reflect on how she actually hates this place that she's given her soul and life to. Again, just like Histar, it is not what she wants. She made a mistake in staying, but here she is, and the duty must be done, she figures, so she's going to go through with it. Otherwise, again, what else is going to happen? Death and disaster to all her children. So now we fast forward to Dany holding court as promised. Resnack is extra happy, which is not surprising given the current circumstances, and Dany is already tired of it all. Her mini break has only resulted in a build-up of work, and all that tedium and annoyance that we saw in earlier court holdings returns in full force. We actually have to wait till we get to Quentyn and the interesting stuff. Unfortunately, we've got bureaucracy to go through first. It is Gallarza Galere who is the first annoyance. She is not satisfied with essentially forcing Dany to marry and give Gallarza everything she wants. Now the Green Grace is going to use some of that power. She's going to abuse it, like we talked about last time when we had the meeting between Dany and Gallarza. She wants to talk about Daario and is kissing her in the courtroom that has just been described to us a few pages ago, and Dany can't believe that she'd be bold enough to bring that up in open court. It is defiance, it is rudeness, it is a sign of all we've worried about in the planning of this wedding. Her dominion has been reduced. People now see her as accessible, as on their level, and Gallarza has come to exploit that. We're going to have very similar talks. I think we made this connection previously as well when we get to Cersei's famous last chapter about how a queen, how a person in a certain position of power can be brought down low, and then that kind of aura, that mystique around them is gone. This wedding is going to serve in a very similar way as Gallarza is showing us here. So Dany feels a blaze of anger at this, but impressively, and not normal for Dany, she manages to not only hold on to it, but also manages to turn it around so that Daario is not explicitly mentioned and public face can be maintained when she pretends that Gallarza is actually speaking about Ben Plum. She then all but dismisses Gallarza from her presence, but only receives another not-so-subtle slap back. So this is a clear sign of how the Histar clan are going to try and run things from now on. It's a great hint. Luckily, as circumstances have it, we don't really get to see too much of that, but that is basically how this would go on for the rest of Dany's life, if it had all gone to plan for them. After that, it's just more boredom until Daario finally arrives with these much-promised Westerosi, and we finally have Quentyn return to our pages. We knew it was a long old gap in between chapters for him, but George is sneaky by allowing us a peek on his progress right here and now. Given everything we've seen from Quentyn so far, we know, like we said at the beginning, full well how important this moment is to him. His friends died for this, remember. We explored that a lot in his 2 chapters. Whatever his personal motivation might be for his own station, whatever his father's plans are, whatever this means for the greater effort of the war, when you get down to it, his people, his friends died just to get him right here for this moment. So the importance of it can't be overstated, can it? We also get a rundown of all the others first, with Pretty Merys being the one who stands out for us. She certainly stands out to Daenerys with her cold eyes, and that really fits with the Brienne theory, given what she would have theoretically seen. We've explained that before. And we have other names explained to us also, but it's finally the 3 Dornish who come last, and those are the ones we really want. Green Guts, and Dornish Gerald, and Dearest Frog. It's likely a good thing that Quentyn can't read Dany's initial reactions to the 3 of them. She notices Archibald and Jairus Drinkwater first. The big man sighs and Drinkwater's winning smile, those are what stands out to her. Quentyn, as he worried about in previous chapters, is unfortunately an afterthought. She even calls him the least impressive, and that description seems to be all-encompassing, whether it be his looks, his charisma, or even his maturity. Still, this is a cool moment for Dany. It's not very often she gets to meet her own countrymen, is it? And that's really needed right now, when you're again just surrounded by everything Meereenese. It makes you wonder whether Viserys bothered to teach her about the important relationship between Dorne and her own house. We know he was quite keen on teaching her certain parts of Targaryen history, but how far into detail did he actually go, especially about support? Well, my guess is he didn't really go into it that much because, amazingly, the word Dorne only appears 7 times so far in this series in Dany chapters. The word Martell, even more amazingly, hasn't been mentioned yet at all in any Dany chapter. That's pretty mind-blowing. She would have known about Elia, but what about the generations long before that Doran reminded us of in last week's ARYA chapter? Did Viserys teach her about that? I'm guessing no. But these three are an oddity. They're another distraction from current events for 5 minutes, so Dany indulges them with polite chat about their names, all until Jaehaerys declares all three of them as knights, and Daario is immediately pissed. Quentyn, at the least, is not supposed to be a knight, so he knows he's been deceived. And then comes Sir Barry on multiple fronts. He needs knights for what is to come, so he's interested. But he has a larger need to defend the order of knighthood that he's given his life to. He'd rather lose to Yunkai tomorrow than let false knights get away with it. So if you're coming in here claiming you're knights when you're really not, Sir Barry is going to give you a kick. Jaehaerys answers Barry's challenge with identifying him as Barristan the Bold, which doesn't confirm they are knights, but does basically confirm they are Westerosi, which is something. And he then freely admits that they have come under false names, probably angering Daario even further, but that is another step towards trust that he admits it freely. And also, Barry did the same thing, so there's a little bit of connection there. When Jaehaerys asks that they reveal their identity to Dany privately, the luck of the world shines on them when she accepts. So it is that the three Dornishmen unveil themselves to Dany and her counsellors. First Jaehaerys, then Archibald, and then Quentyn by way of his parchment. So here comes a major moment that Daenerys was certainly not expecting to experience today, a gigantic leap into a past she's never known. If this had been Sir Willem Darry's takeout order, it would have been the most incredibly meaningful day for her in the first place. But finding that Dorne intended to come to House Targaryen's aid in that ultimate hour of need by way of betrothal and alliance is mind-blowing for her. The names involved, the houses, the history, the secrets, it doesn't get any bigger than this. 1,000,000 years ago, two men had agreed to overthrow Robert Baratheon and restore House Targaryen, which is what her entire mission is. Her life, she finds out, was supposed to have an entirely different road, as different a road as you could imagine, and the world might have looked entirely different if that had happened. Barristan focuses in on the realities. If Robert had known of this, Sunspear would have got the pike treatment. In fact, it probably would have got a lot worse. Robert would eventually respect Balon Greyjoy for trying to make himself king, to some degree anyway, but he would not respect Doran Martell for trying to be sneaky and go behind his back. It says something that Barry believes that Robert would have killed Arianne as well, who would have been a child obviously. That tells us that Barry doesn't believe that Aegon and Rhaenys were an isolated incident. And Barry is probably also thanking his lucky stars that Robert was never told, because chances are Barristan would have had to have some part of leading the assault that would end with dead children. And how would he even reply to such an order? That really would have been a test of all that makes up the Barry conundrum that we're going to visit in his chapters later. Dany notes that Viserys never knew of this either, so even her modern history has been warped. If he had, he would have sold Dany for a pedalo and legged it straight across the narrow sea. So we're really hitting a what-if type moment in history here with mesmerising possibilities. This is one of the biggest reveals of the book for Dany. I mean, we've already covered it personally, we know it, but even back then we remember this was a big deal, so of course it is for Dany here. This being Viserys, of course, the idea of consequences or playing it slow would have never occurred to him, and you've got to think that he and Doran would not have made a good duo there. So smart that Doran was going to wait until Viserys had something to bring with him in the Dothraki. It fits very well with the war you can win discussion that we had last week from the man himself back in Sunspear. That's all quite enough for Daenerys to get through her mind. I mean, that would be enough for the day, wouldn't it? But then this little frog is bending his knee and pronouncing himself Quentyn Martell, Prince of Dawn. So this is a major moment for the both of them, really. For Dany, it is the strongest link to home she's ever had by a country mile. It's confirmation of the constant theory that some in Westeros still support the dragon. It's a reminder of Viserys and Sir Willem Darry and the history of her family, its secrets and plots designed to change her life both back then and now. It's Westeros when she's so stuck and hated Meereen. We know how valuable that is. Whereas for Quentyn, we know this is the culmination of his great mission. He has crossed half the world, lost half his friends, like we've said. He rode through the smoking hell that was Astapor, all for this single moment. This is his loving duty to his father. This is his official day as a prince. It's what his life is supposed to be for. This is all the build-up for his entire existence. It's his love letter to his own country. It is everything he thinks that gives him worth as a man, and Dany laughs. Which is not the reaction anyone expected, and definitely not the one poor Quentyn wanted. That's Quentyn the character, not the half of Notticast that you all know and love. Remember, we saw him working through all of his worries of having to stand up in front of everyone, and then having to talk to the most beautiful, most important woman in the world, and that's all when he's barely kissed anyone. Remember, we went through that. So being laughed at is one of the very worst reactions he could have dreamt up. We can all really imagine how that would hit him. We can all imagine that happening to us, and have some empathy for him here. It's not a nice feeling. So why does she laugh? Well, partly it's because she's just a bit lightheaded at hearing all of this. It is pretty major news. Part of it is a kind of bitter irony at the timing that the great hope of her life should appear in such a form in such a moment. And some of it is likely just desperately needing to laugh again. It's all so foolish What else can you do? But laugh she does at the inside joke of a frog turning into a prince before her eyes. And we know George also enjoys such jokes on famous tropes, so he's having a chuckle as well. And we're left to feel sorry for Quentyn. First for the laugh, and second for the fact that he's failed to win over Dany in the first place. Here's the quote. "Neither enchanted nor enchanting, alas," Dany thought. "A pity he's the prince, and not the one with the wide shoulders and the sandy hair." It is a real shame, there's no other way to put it. We feel bad for Quentyn because it's not his fault he's not enchanting or thrilling. He's not a bad guy in any way, he didn't choose his looks. He's just trying to come and do the right thing and honour his family, so it's harsh for us to read this kind of summary about him based on what could be seen as superficial reasons. Speaking as someone who's always lacked a bit of charisma, and definitely the good looks part, I can put myself in Quentyn's shoes here. But then again, it's not like we can shift blame to Daenerys, is it? If she doesn't find him thrilling, she doesn't find him thrilling. She can only feel what she feels, and there's just no spark there, especially not when she's been having all these wild times with Daario. He is quite the mount at the top, so it's just another timing issue, another part of that factor. Besides, much as this is the nicest and most homely of the offers she's received, Dany still fairly sees it as just another offer, another business transaction. Quentyn Martell is not in love with her. He's never met her. Quentyn Martell wants her as a figurehead. He wants her armies, wants her dragons. We know that, even while it is true that Quentyn is also a kind soul that probably would appreciate her for who she is, he still wants her for what she brings. And besides, Dany is not to know that. She hasn't read Quentyn's POV chapters yet. So it's just timing, isn't it? Timing, timing, timing. We already know that George had to mess around with the timing of this moment when he was going to introduce Quentyn to Meereen quite a fair bit in the writing of Dan, so it obviously affects a whole bunch. This is a very influential moment, this choice here. It travels up from scale in Dany concentrating at the moment on not just being a name and wanting to be loved for her, as we discussed at the beginning of this chapter with Daario, all the way up to her having committed herself to Hizdahr and Meereen and peace already. Quentyn has just come too late, that's the bottom line. But our hearts do ping a little bit as poor Quentyn, obviously reeling from the reaction that Dany gave, hopes that he is merely acceptable when Dany highlights that his coming here obviously means a marriage proposal. As the rest of the court catches up, the locals are obviously not pleased with such an idea. Daario wants no threat to his cash cow, and he is probably pretty intimidating to Quentyn, let's not joke around. Resnack wants no threat to the Hizdahr plans. Even Skahaz is against the idea. He might not want Hizdahr, but he definitely doesn't want some outsider who will obviously take Daenerys and all of her power away. Quentyn has this to say. Dawn is 50,000 spears and swords, pledged to our queen's service. So we did love Jaehaerys sticking up for his friend, but we love Quentyn doing it himself even more, and this is a rousing line. It must be sorely tempting for Dany. She could sure use 50,000 spears, and it's sorely tempting for us as well. We want to see Dany gain this strength. We want her to take the shortcut back home and finally forget this place that is so cruel and miserable for her. This is how we can see our two great halves of the series merging finally, so of course it's exciting. And we see the chapter sequencing at work as George reminded us of everything Dawn last week in Arya's chapter, just so it is fresh in our minds for this very moment. Very, very clever George. Dany puts a stop to Daario's mocking of Quentyn, perhaps realising how her own welcome might have been received. Instead, she recognises the efforts the trio have made to get her. She will not have that disrespected. But then perhaps that is just to assuage her guilt as she deals the hammer blow to the hopes of Quentyn and a nation behind him. She has already pledged her life to another. The answer is no. Again, we as readers know how deep this hits Quentyn and the others. His friends died for this. He had to kill for it. And it's all come apart just because of mere timing. It's unthinkable for him. Quentyn doesn't even seem to be able to speak right now, so Jaehaerys tries to speak for him again, but Dany has had enough for now. She will respect them, she'll look after them, but she won't discuss it here. In fairness, that is likely smart. If she does choose to abandon the Meereenese cause and give in to the dream of home, she probably wants to talk about it in private, away from the general audience. So as she leaves the hall and is retreating back to her chambers, Barry leaps on his opportunity. We know how tempting this is for him. It's a path to his own redemption, to days of old when he served Elia and fought alongside Lewin, and most importantly, it's a way of getting Dany out of this situation and back to her true purpose in Westeros, though he might be giving away some of his own bias in trusting them merely because they are confirmed knights. Dany contends it is all far too theoretical and there's nothing to help her in the here and now. That's all great, 50,000 swords and spears, but they're not here, are they? And I have an issue to deal with. Daario, of course, is just concerned about himself and how he was made a fool of. Dany, meanwhile, connects it all back to Braavos and this original agreement that Sir Willem Darry made. And thinking of Braavos, of course, makes her think of the Red Door that she assumes to be in Braavos, which is always a question for us readers, and it has actually been a while since she thought of it. It doesn't come up that much in this book. So it's always good of George to get a little reminder in there and just add another confusing element to the whole thing. because we're going to figure that is going to become important at some point. She also thinks of that dream that she just had about Hisdar in the cold. She just tries to make sense of everything. Does that have any relation to what's going on here? This new news? Is that connected in some way? It's all just too confusing. Finally, she thinks of Quaithe and does find an answer of sorts. Quentyn is the sun's son that Quaithe mentioned. So that is 2 of her warnings come true now. And therefore she tries to remind herself of the others. She notes the lion and the dragon, which we know to be 2 big, true parts, but who knows when they actually interact. To Dany, she focuses on the seneschal, because that seems to be the most demanding, but again, who knows? It is also confusing and stressful, and she's just had enough. Her mood was dark already before you added these confusions and temptations. Prophecy only makes it worse, so she finally retreats back into her sweet relief of Daario Naharis one last time. Let me just forget all this extra. Let me have what makes me feel good for once. That is the one simple thing in her life, and it's about to leave, so she best enjoy it, which she certainly seems to, and good for her. So ding dong, it's wedding day. That cruel dawn that Dany has dreaded has finally arrived despite her pleads not to, and with it comes grumpy Daario again. Who knows, maybe Daario is emotionally upset that he's losing this woman, but it's much more likely it's just another ego blow and he doesn't get all the benefits anymore. For whichever reason, he's clearly jealous and bitter of both Hisdar and even Quentyn as well. Whatever his motivation, he does not believe this is fair. He does not like the type of man that is beating him to the prize, and there's likely some bitterness over the societal structure that keeps him down as well. And Dany seems to share that in wishing that he had been born of an acceptable surname. Dany has lost a love before and knows Daario will soon be gone from her life as well as her bed. She tries to be playful in response, but Daario only becomes all the more mocking, all the more immature, and finally heads out to kill because that's all he knows, that is his life and world. Dany, cruelly, is left alone. That problem, at least, is solved by the appearance of Melisandre, one of the other rare bright spots in Dany's life. And the tiny passage we have right here is one of those ones that does make you wonder if there is more to Melisandre than meets the eye, because she certainly speaks like someone well advanced beyond her years as she tries to take care of Dany and make her own pitch to abandon the engagement. This is a theme we're going to probably talk about a little bit more as we get into Barristan's chapters when he talks to Melisandre, and again she just seems a lot wiser than she should be, but well, we'll talk about that later. Like with many other aspects of Dany's life, the final inning is littered with temptations and doubts. But as before, she stays strong. Love doesn't come into it today, duty does. So hold up your Jon mirrors again. Yeah. Instead, it is time to begin the arrangements and be reminded of all that she's conceded to make this wedding happen, when the other side seems to have given up little just yet, especially as she thinks of all the palanquin bearers essentially still being slaves out there, so right from the off, this is the opposite of what she really wants. Dany dons her pearly tokar instead of the Dothraki vest she really wants. Dany rides in a sedan chair instead of the horse she desired. How much better it would have been to ride in proud and capable, on the silver from her past, some small part of her first husband delivering her to her second, but the bloody and practical dress sees to that. So out Dany goes into the sun with her rabbit ears at their largest. She's told how beautiful she is and how wonderful the day is and all of that stuff, but Dany only focuses on the fact that this is needed as a political deal. She's a saviour, and to save people, she needs to do this, as she reflects on with an inner debate about the difference between a queen and a woman. Dany even sees herself in the poor elephants that got thrown in with her pyramid. Like her, they've been dressed up, cut back and diminished. The poor creature's eyes are sad, just as beautiful Dany's must be, and that bit hits us hard, I think. Before hitting the public streets, Dany runs into Barry and the Dornish Free, as poor Quentyn, I'm going to keep with that name, makes a last attempt to stop all this. Quentyn being Quentyn, he first apologises for who he is, and that fact being displeasing, but Dany interrupts him. Kindly, gently, she tells him again it's over. The wedding will go ahead, but Dorne need not weep. One day she will come west, and her first port of call for allies will be House Martell, but she has a city to save first, she has children to consider. Fine promises they may be, but that is not what Quentyn came here for, and we're not told here, right now, but we know that Quentyn must be disappearing into a hole of misery and guilt for his father and for the friends he's lost, so at least Dany's melancholy has company, but we also know, rereaders know, this is going to push him down a road, a very, very important, dangerous, deadly road of desperation, and that in turn is going to lead to what we must guess is going to be a major plot point in the release of the dragons. We're yet to see the true consequences of that, but we're all looking forward to it. We'll have to see that later though. For now, this is still a Dany chapter, and she rides forth into the sun with her faithful Barry at her side. The coming event pushes her to ask about her own parents. They married for duty, as she is about to, but were there other paths available, loves that they turned down? Given what she might be doing with Quentyn, it is a day to reflect on what could have been. Barry is loath to tell the truth because he knows how painful it can be, and that he's always prided himself on ignoring the less savoury parts of the kings he's served, something that is really a major mark against him. Again, we'll revisit that in his chapters. But he does relent, first focusing on Rhaella once Dany has worn him down a bit. He gives this quote, "As a girl though, she was once smitten with a young knight from the Stormlands who wore her favour at attorney and named her Queen of Love and Beauty. A brief thing." So if you remember, we brought this up before, back in Feast, the idea that Sir Bonifer Hasty, the man currently in charge of Harrenhal and who Jaime introduced us to in that book, is Rhaella's secret love, or was Rhaella's secret love. So we've met him before, we discussed that at length then, we won't go too into it now, probably because it largely won't matter really in the long run, you would think. But really I think we should just always do our best to give a moment over to considering poor Rhaella, the forgotten queen in truth. She doesn't really get enough of the spotlight. She suffered for the majority of her life at the hands of a madman. Doing her duty brought her nothing but pain, and overall it didn't do much for the kingdom either, so it is worth considering given Dany's current situation. Aerys is obviously a trickier subject as always. Barry doesn't want to talk about him on 2 counts. Number 1, it's awkward to tell a daughter how mad and evil her father was, especially in his actions against women. And number 2, this is not just a point of guilt on giving away what he has sworn not to, but again it's a reminder of what he, Barristan Selmy, ignored in the past. It is his deepest shame. But for now he does reveal what we've already heard before. Aerys desiring Joanna Lannister, and this giving way to the great rift between he and Tywin that eventually led to the sack of a city. And yes, it's true, it is also a great jumping off point for theories about Aerys being a father of the Lannister children, but since I buy into none of that, I'm just going to skip over it. Besides, Barry's story is interrupted by the arrival of another person being borne along in a massive chair, the groom, Hizdahr zo Loraq. Dany only has a mind for Daario, however, that's who she's thinking of right now. She briefly daydreams of Daario riding up and stealing her away, as Rhaegar once did to Lyanna Stark, obviously ignoring the gigantic fallout that came about because of it, before remembering she is dealing with reality and duty, not dreams. But it's a big moment for readers also, because let's be honest, we've been hoping that something would happen at the last minute to stop this. Maybe it be Quentyn, maybe it be Daario, maybe the dragons would come and save her. We've already seen Jane Poole lose her wedding battle. Surely Dany will be set free. Come on, George. Alas, no. So just damn. So the time has come instead. They are at the temple. Galaza Galere has appeared to claim her victory. And Dany notes that Azara is not there. That's the Blue Grace who first told her of the dying Astapori, that woman who arrived first. And Dany wonders if the flux has got to her, which very much could be true. Or maybe she was just too pro-Dany. It's probably an unimportant note, but it's got me wondering. Anyway, Hizdahr does wash Dany's feet in front of everyone. We remember discussing that before. So it's kind of a victory, but it's not really. Especially when the ending line comes out to haunt us all. 4 hours later, they emerged again as man and wife, bound together wrist and ankle with chains of yellow gold. Well, before we break that down too much, 4 hours of that rubbish. Bloody hell. But I also think we all see the symbolism in the final sentence. We mentioned earlier how characters in chains are here, there and everywhere in this book. It's one of the prevailing themes, of course, and now we have another. Daenerys Targaryen, a slave who won her own freedom before, the breaker of chains, is now chained herself once again. It's been true for half this book, okay, yep, but now it is deafening. Chains of gold are as trapping of the soul as any other kind. So our hearts are kind of broken again as we consider this is not what we wanted to happen. This is a defeat. There's no other way to put it. We know Dany doesn't want it, we know it's not fair, we probably have major concerns about the actual reality of this giving Dany what she wants in terms of peace and safety and everything else. Maybe it will in the interim, maybe it won't, maybe it's not even going to get that far, but either way we know this is bad for her and well, we do not like it. And it's had the knock-on effect of dealing a defeat to Quentyn as well, so this is just everything the opposite of what we would like. What an ending to a chapter. Ah dear. It is not good at all. We're just having no luck with weddings so far in this book, aren't we? So let's try our luck if we zigzag back across to Westeros, then back up to the north. We're revisiting Castle Black now. Let's get on with Jon IX. So we have a new phase here at Castle Black, one that is going to carry on with us through the end of the book. It's the arrival of Queen Selyse Baratheon and unfortunately all of her queen's men. So that is important to note because this new faction of people who already kind of had, well, back at the beginning with Stannis, he had his own queen's men with him. Now this new lot, they are going to, well, they're going to cause trouble, we know, but they're going to be an important part of all the chaos that happens at the very end of this book. So that's important to note on its own. But it also just means that Jon has to act differently, he's got a new game to play, and Castle Black, that was volatile already, is even more so now. In this chapter, we'll see the beginnings of that, we'll see Jon trying very much to plan his way, try and use Selyse in whatever way he can, and others that she's brought with him. He's going to build a bit further on what we had in this last chapter, about his plans for Hardhome and what he can possibly do there. But most importantly, I think we'll all agree, is the end of the chapter, which is quite different from the first 2 parts. It focuses on the truth of Melisandre's fire visions finally coming home to roost, as the dying girl on the horse finally arrives. Jon has a great many thoughts about ARYA, because that's who he obviously believes it to be that is arriving at Castle Black. We love that, because I've said many times before, Jon and ARYA would probably be the biggest reunion, most emotional reunion left in this series, in my opinion anyway. It's definitely a fan favourite, that relationship, so him just thinking of her, that's enough to get us. Unfortunately, then we have the reality, but it leads into what's later to come in this episode, so that's a great link, and we're all very hungry to get to it. Let's jump into the text. So, like I say, we're moving from one queen to another, from Daenerys to Selyse, so we like this one a shit ton less, don't we? Yes, indeed, it is time for the reunion with Queen Selyse Baratheon. Yay. If you got any party poppers left, you might want to sound them now. Yeah, like we don't have enough to deal with in this book, now there's Selyse on top of it. Like Jon specifically doesn't have enough quarrelling parties to try and balance out, he now has another. Or two, really, because like I said, he not only has another royal he is technically / arguably beholden to, he also has 50 more armed queensmen. So that's just always got to be considered in everything Jon thinks about. And these queensmen, let's talk about them a little bit, because yes, we hadn't seen them for a while since Stannis left, but now we've seen them twice in one episode. We had them earlier in Asha's arc, now we've got more in Jon's arc. They're really infiltrating the whole plot. They're mixing both these plot lines. They're dangerous, like I've already mentioned, and they're just generally unwelcome by the reader. None of them are particularly nice. We know they can be very much the opposite of nice, although it does kind of excite us because it is another symbol that we're kind of racing towards the end here, Jon's death. We're really just tumbling towards it. The arrival of Selyse means gameplay, unfortunately, just as Jon had to do with Stannis. There's always some level of that. We've talked about the trappings of power from Melisandre, but it's double time now in those terms. He needs them now if he's to remain on equal footing or even near equal footing when dealing with this empty queen, especially given he knows they're going to have plenty to argue about. Hence, Jon begins the chapter coming with this little group / retinue, even though that's not really his style at all. But it's got to be done, or she's going to mistake him for a stable boy, and the whole relationship and balance of power will start off on the wrong foot. However, somewhat hilariously, that is exactly what still happens when Jon takes the knee in front of Selyse and she thinks him as a stable boy. Jon, in fairness, manages to handle it perfectly. He would probably prefer to be a stable boy right now, wouldn't he? Selyse puts it down to his age rather than the general look of him, but either way is really not the best start. Not at all. So even from the beginning here, we kind of need a pick-me-up, and it is delivered in the form of Shireen, the shy little girl who still blushes at being called a princess. It's been an age since we last saw her in the classroom of Maester Pylos back on Dragonstone, yes, that long ago, and we could well use some of her innocence and sweetness at a time like this. Then again, that is our own selfishness coming through, isn't it? For really, it's actually a very bad thing that she's here at all. That Shireen should be up here in the middle of winter with war on one side and the others on the other. Especially if we get into long-held theories that unfortunately aren't even theories anymore, about her future and end. No, it is better we go without her sweetness and she gets far away from here, even if we know that's actually not going to happen. Though it also does mean that Patchface is around, which is cool because we've still got plenty of questions about him, and he's that little bit more interesting now that we've actually been to Volantis. We're not going to get many more answers in this book, but still the questions remain. To balance out that good, we have to have some bad, which we get when we're also reacquainted with Axel Florent, the dickhead who threatened to have Davos thrown off a bridge because he wanted his job. The man who is ambitious, he's false, and, in the end of the day, useless. Just the sort of man that Jon needs to be putting up with right now. We also get an introduction to some more key knights of Selyse's bunch. Your Sir Narberts, your Sir Patricks, your Sir Benethons, all of our fairly knobhead names, don't they? And some of these names will come to stick out in Dance, but others won't. Perhaps they might find the spotlight and wins. Again, we're going to assume this faction is going to be pretty important given the end of this book. Much more interesting than them, though, is Tycho Nestoris, representative of the Iron Bank that we last saw having to deal with Cersei in Feast, which was unlucky for him. Now you might remember, I'm sure you do, that she basically just kind of ghosted him and then called his bluff that he would never be able to go and help Stannis, and that she didn't need him, she could treat him how she liked. So this is a very smug moment to find out that Tycho has done just that, and that Cersei is yet again an idiot, as if we needed any reminder. Although she is coming up again soon, so why not throw a reminder in there? Jon knew about this guy's coming and he's been planning ever since. In fact, he views him as more important than Selyse, so we start seeing the connections back to earlier Jon chapters, where he was doing that inventory and where he explained grand, hopeful plans for the future. Well, this is his first real step in that direction now. The gameplaying continues as Jon offers up the King's Tower again, the one that Stannis took when he was here. Everything is polite right at the beginning here, but you can already tell that Selyse considers herself above them all and the tone could very easily change. Luckily, Selyse says she only intends to be here for a few days. This is just a mere stop-off on the way to the Night Vault, so that gets us all hopeful that we don't have to put up with her for very long. In the meantime, Selyse is keen to get to Melisandre, and that makes sense. They've been apart for an age as well, and we know how obsessed with Melisandre this queen is. Plus, there is plenty to catch up on with Stannis in the field. And I must say, it would have been great fun to have Melisandre's POV while she talks with Selyse, to see how she actually views this woman that fawns over her. That would have been quite fun, I think. On their way to the King's Tower, Jon has a go at persuading Selyse to just bugger off back to Eastwatch and out of the way, but Selyse is having none of it. First, it's just because Cotter Pike is too rough at her liking, but then it's only this far into the chapter, just a mere 2 pages, that Selyse loses all composure. She's already lost it in worrying about the Eastwatch attack and Mel's vision that the assault will come there, that one that we were told about from the Fire Visions. Obviously the news flows both ways along the wall, and Selyse therefore thinks she has to worry about her safety, Shireen's safety, everyone's safety. She's not having any of it, she's not going back. And those worries particularly make it bad timing for them to run into 1-1, our favourite giant. And Shireen, because she's cool, loves him immediately. And we have to love her curiosity about the world, don't we? Selyse, because she is not cool, does not like him whatsoever, and is entirely disapproving of his presence here beneath the wall. So, well, that's good, isn't it? That's just what we need. Someone else to contend Jon's decisions like we saw in his last chapter. Now, in fairness, like in that last chapter, Jon sticks up for 1-1. He says he's a guest of the Night's Watch, just as you are. And that bit at the end, that might be his mistake, because Selyse clearly does not like being put on the same level as 1-1 in any way. Now, in fairness to her and these knights, they've only just come up from the south. Yes, they've been at Eastwatch for a while. This is a very different place for them in general. But seeing a giant for the first time, or at least being in this close vicinity for the first time, it can be quite the culture shock, I would imagine. I've not done it personally, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, that would be pretty weird. But still, we can see already there's bad vibes being set up between Jon and Selyse and her party. Especially when 1-1 sees Patchface in his little jingling hat. And 1-1 considers this hilarious. He loves Patchface. He's fascinated with the guy, and he begins to reach for him, which we would like to assume is just kind of sweet and heartwarming, but these Southern Knights, they are not of the same opinion. They want to take the opportunity to have their egos tested and measure the length of their swords, if you get what I mean. So they step in front of Patchface, get in between 1-1, even with Jon's warning that this would be a super foolish idea on their part, they keep coming anyway. So he has to defuse the situation by removing the giant instead. Yes, it's easier to move a giant than get grown men to calm down for 2 seconds. But still, we can see the importance of that moment. We can see the foreshadowing of the chaotic moment we know is coming at the end of the book. We know there's going to be some clash going on here, and even first-time readers can probably sense the weight of that. Unfortunately, it means that Jon doesn't get any more time with Shireen, which is a shame because Jon is a willing teacher here, and Shireen is the willing student. But because of these foolish grown-ups, that doesn't get explored anymore. But back to that foreshadowing, that gets doubled down on now, as Jon scolds these foolish, brash knights with Eddard's own words, which we love. There's advice to never draw your sword unless you mean to use it. And someone talks back about that word, and it turns out to be Patrick of King's Mountain, who Jon thinks of as another bloody sovereign fool. And Jon, you couldn't be more right, and we couldn't be more full of this foreshadowing, could we? Because Sir Patrick will indeed use his sword against 1-1, and Sir Patrick will indeed find out why Jon says it is such a dumb idea. Oh, yes, he definitely will, in no uncertain terms. But for now, he mocks Jon about his hospitality views, meaning he'll be real mad when the Tormund deal goes through, and Castle Black is suddenly flooded with absolute guests. He is basically setting himself up as another rival to Jon, just as those that we saw recently in Asha's chapter did earlier on in the book. So George is really setting us up for later plot points right here. Thankfully though, that party does go off towards the King's Tower, and with Selyse out of the way, that means that Jon is able to go into negotiation mode and put his plan into action as he and Tycho and Astoris retire to Jon's Solar. First, Jon establishes what we already suspect. Tycho is here because Cersei has pushed him here. With her refusal to keep up the payments of the crown and her blind arrogance that she can get away with not doing so merely because she considers herself higher and more important than Tycho, yeah, I think we remember that vibe, she has ensured the possibility of Stannis getting Iron Bank funding and making his entire campaign much more potent and legitimate. This is huge for the optics across Westeros. It's astoundingly bad tactics from Cersei. I know, you're as surprised as I am. Not only is her crown and position massively in debt, which is problem enough, but she's now given perhaps her main rival that extra advantage and ruling ability over her. This is a facet that Stannis has never had, this financial stability and this legitimacy from other parties, and she's just dumped both in his lap. It's good news for us in general, because we don't like Cersei, we like seeing her mistakes. We generally do like Stannis, or at least we support his cause, so this extra help is very much appreciated. The irony is that George is flexing his chapter sequencing muscles, because we know that currently gold is the last thing that Stannis actually needs as he freezes away in that Crofters village. How cruel to be told of such a boon so soon after witnessing his apparent ruin. And how will that truth affect these negotiations here? Obviously neither of these men know that Stannis is almost on his way out, or so it appears to us. That would definitely change matters for the Iron Bank, wouldn't it? To be fair, right here in this conversation, I can see Tycho's strategy. If any king is absolutely guaranteed to honour the depths of his throne, it's going to be Stannis, and the Iron Bank are obviously pretty tired of not being paid back. So they're going to go for the honourable man, aren't they? But Jon had guessed much of all that. His job now is firstly to redirect Tycho's eventual destination from Deepwood to Winterfell in order to find Stannis. And he keeps quiet on the possibility he might only find a corpse at Winterfell, as we are worried about definitely after Asha's chapter. Jon's only worried about the battle. We know we've got the storm to contend with as well. So Tycho will go to Deepwood first, then he'll go to Winterfell with the assistance of the Night's Watch, Jon promises, if he's willing to pay the price. And Jon doesn't pull any punches with his requests. He's bold, he's direct. First, he wants to borrow the 3 ships that Tycho brought with him across the Narrow Sea, although we're not told what for just yet. And most importantly, there is to be a loan. Jon has the heavy responsibility of feeding Castle Black, 2 more castles on top, and any that he is currently regarrisoning, plus the wildlings that he already has, plus the wildlings that might still come with Tormund. And I'm not sure if he's responsible for feeding Selyse and her bunch as well, but it's a strong bet. We remember the inventory, we remember Bowen-Marsh's declaration, so we know this is a major issue for him. Starvation and famine have already struck across the land, never forget Jaime's final thoughts and feast, and the wall is going to feel it hardest given their surroundings. So this is a huge part of Jon's rule and we know how much he wants it. Here's a quote for you. By the time Jon Snow signed the parchment that Braavosi drew up, both of them were half drunk and quite unhappy. Jon thought that a good sign. I always like that, I'm just including it for you there. It's only after that we are told why Jon wants the ships, and it's purely to augment the fleet that the Night's Watch currently owns. Eastwatch commands 11 ships, some of them in better condition than others, and though Jon would love more, this is what he's got. He intends to send the fleet to Hardhome. He intends to save the wildlings that we talked about last time out, if he can, for all those reasons that we listed in that last chapter. Jon wanting to save human lives is being the main one. Who knows if it'll work? Some are surely likely to refuse and die, or accept and still drown, but this is the best he can do and he must do it. And unknowingly, he actually hints here on the trust issues that rereaders know will be even worse than Jon thinks, but we're going to learn a lot more about that in the next chapter, the final chapter coming up today. Earlier on, Jon said the Snows had moved south, and we know the truth of that thanks to Asha, but when he and Tycho finish, they've also started back up again at Castle Black, such as winter. Jon allows himself the briefest self-indulgence to take a chance on asking if Tycho just so happened to encounter Samwell Tarly or any of his party over in Braavos, because Jon still knows nothing of their journey, remember. He sent off his best friend, his mentor, a wonderful wildling and an innocent baby, and doesn't know if they drowned a day into their journey, or if they are sitting comfy down in Old Town. Obviously, Tycho does not know either, but it's a good reminder that they are probably the heaviest names graven on Jon's heart still. Speaking of the Narrow Sea brings Tycho to remind us of all the various fleets upon it, and then he adds another, the rumour of what we know is Jon Connington coming across from Essos. Somehow, Tycho has heard that they might include a dragon / a Targaryen. We'll learn later that Jon Con has done his best to suppress that information for the initial part of the invasion, so how in the world Tycho has heard this, I do not know. In the same way that Jon doesn't know that he's being told about the return of a potential sibling, and maybe a contender for his own throne as well. Who's to say? Let's just be aware of the general uptick of the word dragon in Jon's chapters. We had Val randomly bring it up in the last chapter without explanation, and now we've got it again. George is just slipping it in there, almost like some subliminal advertising. Just to check, I've gone ahead and looked for you, the word dragon appears in a Jon chapter 17 times in this book. In the first 3 books in which Jon appeared, combined, just 11 times. Game, clash, storm, 11 times, dance, 17. So make of that what you will. Down in the feast hall is basically a social event in the Night's Watch's calendar, and everyone has come out to take part. How often is there something different in your day? Someone different to talk to, some new story. There's even women to look at. It's quite the luxury. These moments are genuinely important for the watch, even if Selyse has chosen not to partake herself. While we enjoyed the interaction with Tycho, we now have to balance that out again with the bad, as Axel Florent comes sauntering over to talk to Jon. Luckily, Jon has this guy pegged from the beginning. He knows what sort of person he is, as well as some additional extras. If he is not a kinslayer, he is the next best thing, Jon thinks. Ah yes, the story of poor Alistair Florent has been helpfully passed on to Jon by Aemon, and it tells him everything he needs to know about trusting this ambitious man. But it also leads to this thought. What sort of man can stand by idly and watch his own brother being burned alive? We've got to wonder if this is foreshadowing of some kind. Obviously, Jon would never watch any of his Stark brothers burn alive, but will he have to watch it happen to one of his Night's Watch brothers in the future? Or can we argue this is referencing what's already happened with his refusal to let Mance, quote unquote, burn? He was a Turncloak, but he was a brother first, so maybe that's just referencing that. For now, Axel doesn't mess around with pleasantries and instead gets down to inquiring about the whereabouts of Val, the princess they've heard about and his obvious target for his next ambitious climb. Jon has to again explain that Val is not a princess, but it falls on deaf ears as per usual. Like others before him, Axel sees advancement in her title, perceived or not, and if she's good looking as well, that's all to the better for him. And we get a reminder of why we hate Axel so much when he acts like Val is some commodity to be inspected. What a dick. Jon is wise enough to know that this is another part of the politics game. The secret of Val's mission was never going to stay secret, but Axel is acting as though it is in order to test Jon and see how he acts, to see what he's dealing with as a barrier to further advancement. Jon keeps his poker face and does not blink. Jon has her, he is not giving up her location, and he is not bringing her out for him. And that alone is enough to break Axel's composure as he starts playing the position card and tries to call rank on Jon, threatening to have Val dragged here in chains. Jon knows there is no worry of that, but it would expose the lie and set a precedent on his relationship with Selyse and the order of power in Castle Black right now. So before it goes any further, Jon walks away, but we know this is a thread that will surely be picked up again. Here's another random quote for you here. Across the yard, the king's tower turned into a hulking shadow, the lights in its windows obscured by falling snow. I bring that up just because it's wonderful symmetry. Stannis is cooped up in a tower you can barely see for the snow, and now it's the exact same for his wife. Jon gets some more time alone now to reflect on his deal with Tycho, thinking on how he might have signed up the Night's Watch for crippling debt that could last for generations. That would be bad, but then again, there is literally no other choice. It's that or starvation, so away we go. What it does do is remind us that Jon is intending to buy food from the south with this money that he's got from Tycho, but we all know there is no food south. It's something Jon should have paid a bit more attention to, if we're honest. The after effects of war and all its consequences. Much of Westeros is in the same situation that he's in, so this plan might have failed before it began. What good is gold going to do when there's no food around? Remember, again, I'm going to remind you, Jaime and the Riverlands. Where is Jon going to find food? From the Reach? Okay, perhaps, but that's a hell of a long supply chain, and they're about to enter their own chaos with Euron. Riverlands? Nope. King's Landing? Nope. It seems the only likely option is going to be the Vale. We know Peter Baelish is hoarding, we know he loves a deal, so if he thinks he can spare it, perhaps it'll give Jon a connection to Sansa, maybe some food as well. We can hope, can't we? It all allows Jon to think on how stupid Cersei has been and what an enemy she has made in the Iron Bank. As we mentioned earlier, this could swing the entire war. This could literally carry Stannis to the Iron Throne, but only if he survives this massive first hurdle, which we are certainly worried about at this point in time after reading Asha's chapter. I do think it's easy to forget though. It doesn't figure enough into our projections of what can happen if Stannis does win the Battle of Winterfell and what this huge cash influx will do for him. If society is still stable enough for such things as money and gold, then it's really a big game changer. Jon also reflects on his plan for the fleet, giving some extra details about that plan and even wondering if he should go himself. That feels the first time of equal parts excitement and dread, at least until Jon remembers what happened to the last Lord Commander to lead an expedition. No, Jon. Never compare yourself to Jill Mormont. Never. He accidentally falls into a much-deserved sleep, only to be woken about news of a girl having appeared on this side of the wall. Naturally, his first thought is that it must be ARYA, finally here on that dying horse that Melisandre promised. And apparently this girl is highborn as well, so it must be ARYA, mustn't it? And equally as importantly, she's okay, she's being looked after, and Jon cannot deny the excitement rising in his chest. Jon felt 15 years old again. Little sister, he thought. Oh dear, it hurts deep for us readers who know that he's going to be disappointed. We've got no idea who this is at this point, but we know it ain't ARYA, and actually we know it's not Jane either. So sheer disappointment is going to be coming Jon's way any second, a real stab to the heart as he's denied what would be the happiest experience he could ask for in this life. Again, I'll remind you, we've spoken plenty about this being the biggest reunion in the series. Jon is aware of that, and he thinks he's about to get it, so the truth is really just irrevocably sad. There's thoughts about Mance and Mel's accuracy and what those two are up to, but they can wait for later, as Jon all but sprints out of his chambers. Then again, Jon being Jon, he's already trying to dampen his own spirit. Perhaps by means of self-protection, he's already thinking that ARYA will have no place here. Not only is it a cruel place for a child to grow up, it wouldn't be safe given her worth or her gender, which gives some warning signs about Shireen, doesn't it? That worth makes her a tool in too many eyes, whether that be Stannis, or Melisandre, or whoever's next. There's a reason that George brought up the conversation about Val prior to this ARYA person turning up. It's to remind us, and Jon, that if ARYA becomes a player in this game, as Stannis hopes, then she'll be married off to some fool like Godric Giant Slayer. Jon has already lost her once. He's not going to let anything like that happen to her now, nor will he risk Melisandre's games. Which leads to perhaps one of the most ironic moments in all the Song of Ice and Fire, Jon planning to save Arya by sending her across the Narrow Sea, maybe even to Braavos, where she obviously is already and where we all want her to return from. It's heartwarming though to see Jon's brotherly nature kick in. He'll do whatever he needs to make safety happen for Arya, whatever he needs. There's a tragic element in there too though, as he thinks this. Arya would need silver to support her, a roof above her head, someone to protect her. She was only a child. Much as we like the idea of Jon being the one to go off and protect her, we're pretty sure that's never going to happen. And there's this thinking of her as only a child. Technically that's true in terms of age, but in terms of life experience, she is far, far beyond that now. The long-haired girl that Jon last saw when he gave her needle is long gone, even if Arya hadn't started messing with whether she's even Arya at all anymore. That is going to be very, very difficult for Jon to process whenever he does eventually find her again. It speaks to a little bit of his own sticking his head in the sand, keeping that Winterfell version of her instead of imagining what she might have been through since and how she might have changed, but we can understand that form of mental self-defense. Besides, we know the truth is probably much worse than they could ever dream of. So comes the moment, the one we know is going to be a letdown, and yet even so we do get a little tingle for. At minimum, we're damn curious about who is actually here, even if we know any answer is going to be emotionally painful for Jon. She looked enough like Arya to give him pause, but only for a moment. It is a damn sweet moment though. Jon doesn't allow his own feelings to get in the way, and he instead immediately switches to simply caring for this girl when she wakes up anyway. Jon is unknowingly seeing the old Stark blood in Alyce Karstark even before she gives her name. She has the look of Arya and Lyanna and countless more women before them when he actually does recognise her once she gives some hints to her surname. Although Jon hasn't seen her since she was 6, so that is some pretty good recognition skills there. Well done, Jon. While the Karstarks have been mentioned a fair bit in this book already, now is where they really enter the plot. First is a look into the past as we learn that Rickard Karstark once had plans to make Robb his son-in-law, years before he would serve and then betray him as a king. So like with Dany's chapter, we have a bit of the what could have been sense. This is a betrothal that very easily could have happened in a different world. Or, to look at another connection, this is half the story that Barbary Dustin recently shared. Love of an heir of Winterfell, soon taken away by events from down south. Robb and Alyce were never given the chance for that kind of attraction to materialise, but it's not out of the realm that could have happened. Thinking of Rickard makes Jon think of Rickard's end, and he finds himself still very much entangled in all the past strings of his family's endeavours, even if he's not supposed to be. Whatever happens, Jon is still included in the Stark family history. Still, if he was worried about resentment coming from this young woman, he needn't be. Alyce Karstark has come looking for help. She unravels the story and lifts the lid on House Karstark's inner turmoil. We've heard the name Arnulf and we know he's a turncloak, but now comes the story in full, the consequences of Rickard's betrayal and Robb's retribution. Though she presents it in a tongue-twist fashion, we eventually get the gist of it. Rickard's brother and nephew are trying to usurp the control of the house rather than allow Alyce or her surviving brother, Harry, to take the reins. Harry, who we remember better as Harrion, is the heir to House Karstark as Rickard's son, but he's still a captive down south. Just to turn the clock way back, Harrion was one of the poor souls put into Roose Bolton's half of Robb's split army. Knowing that the Karstarks could present a potential problem down the road, Harrion became the target of Roose's give the game away tactics and wound up getting captured twice. Once on the Green Fork, that first match-fixing conflict of Roose's, that round him up in Harrenhal, as we saw via Arya, and then once he was released by Roose's arrival, he was given away again in the order to take Duskendale. So he's either a prisoner down there, or he's perished, we don't actually know. Which has made Alyce all the more valuable, that not knowing. With Rickard and his sons dead, that has left evil Uncle Arnulf planning to wed his son Cregan to Alyce and have the entire house for themselves, and Alyce is not having it. So she's come north looking for a protector, and looking for justice, the kind that Eddard Stark used to serve. Alyce proves herself yet further similar to Arya with her anger and her defiance. She is equally distressed about her eventual betrothal to Darren Hormwood also ending in death, so it's another nod to Barbary there, and that her father was killed by Robb for the crime of killing the enemy. So this is a tense moment that easily could have gone either way. But instead of reacting with passion, Jon merely enlightens Alyce on the true events, and she accepts it willingly enough, to be fair to her. She knew her father. She has a clearer head on her shoulders as Jon does when she makes sure there is no bad blood between them, and Jon confirms of course there is not. She gives some further details, the most crucial for Jon, as Alyce spills that Arnulf has declared for Stannis only as a measure to piss off the Lannisters and encourage the killing of Harrion, if he lives, as a punishment. Let's face it, that is the kind of thing that would definitely work on Cersei, so pretty clever. And it's good job George as well. We've seen lots of different family plots and intricacies, but this one is pretty new to us overall. So that's just great work to still be crunching out original ideas, even less late in the game. Alyce confirms that she is to be used as so many women are. Married, used to bring a child into the world, and that's it. That is to be Alice's life, an avenue for her uncle and his son to steal what is hers, dishonour the memory of her father and brother, and most of all disregard her as a person with the theft of her body. So she needs Jon Snow. Jon is sympathetic, but is trying to maintain his ever-dodgy neutrality. He'll help her as much as his role allows, but this is a matter for Stannis, seeing as he claims to be the king. And that's when Alice drops the big bomb that we already know about, but changes the game once that Jon knows about it. Arnulf is a turncloak. He is going to betray Stannis and wipe him out for House Bolton and his own spoils instead. Chapter sequencing coming into play again. We already know the storm might finish off Stannis for them, but we also know how much the Stannis camp believes that Arnulf will be their saviour, their light at the end of this snowy tunnel. They're going to walk into his arms as eager as puppies. So if we didn't think it was doom and gloom beforehand for Stannis' chances, it most certainly is now. And all of it just provides another chance for the Boltons, another bad person in power in the north, which they obviously want. So if Stannis is out, that leaves her one option, the man that Alice has already targeted in Jon Snow. We have the quote, Alice knelt before him, clutching the black cloak. You are my only hope, Lord Snow. In your father's name, I beg you, protect me. There's lots of elements here to break down. First and foremost is the Star Wars connection, and the Central Princess asking the removed guy for help. You know I'm going to have to mention that. Then there's the evoking of Ned's name. There's the simple fact of a young girl in danger asking Jon for help. Either of those on their own would be enough to persuade him. We should note that the black cloak is mentioned as well, it's highlighted. So is that there to remind him that he's not supposed to get involved, or that he's sworn to protect the realms of men? We can argue it, but we can get into some very dodgy ground of interpretations by doing so. This is also an official request, an oath of sorts, and Jon can't ignore it. There's the reminder to serve the North, protect what Ned built, and the question of what would he have done. All of that swirls up against Jon's repeated stated task of not getting involved. That's just not going to happen, is it? It's another little slip, further and further as we rush into his undoing. Not that we blame him this time round. This is Jon at his most awesome, as we say so often. Saving a girl in distress, knitting the differences between Northmen and wildlings a little bit later on with this opportunity, and stopping the evil guy, saving Stannis, as well as nipping the Fen problem in the bud and making an ally for life in Alice's House Karstark. It's Jon being amazing. He blows my mind, he really does. So that's a rousing ending, we like that. We always love Jon being the good guy. We're now wondering how Jon is going to affect Stannis' campaign. How is he going to save that whole betrayal type thing? How is he going to save Alice? How is he going to affect the North even when he swears he's not going to? We know he is. That's what we want. So we're served a little bit. This is a bit of a highlight of the end of a chapter, which we don't really get a lot of in today's episode. But all that is the build-up, isn't it? All of that just has to play second fiddle today, really, for this last chapter we have coming up. It's one we've been waiting for so long. It's one that's genuinely important in terms of reuniting us with a beloved central character. Yes, wait no longer. We are back with Arya as we go to Braavos and visit Arya 1/The Blind Girl. So even before we get going here, I'm not really sure how to quantify it. Arya, I think you'll know, is one of our central characters. I'll expand on that in a minute. She is a lot of people's favourite character, and there's a lot of evidence as to why. Of course, she is. She's awesome, and we've spent so much time with her before that this gap that we've been on ever since the end of Storm really does hit us hard. Yes, we did see her in Feast, but it was so low compared to normal, and in this book, she's not been here yet. So finally, we have her back, and to turn the page and realise that is just an absolute treat. We'll only get her 2 times in this book, so we really have to appreciate, and I'm afraid I must say from the top here, probably not going to have the time to talk about everything I'd like to in this chapter. Time is just working against me here, but we'll get to as much as we can because we love Arya and she deserves it. So even before we get to what this chapter is about and what we're going to be looking at here, and just appreciate, we're back with one of our best, one of our first, and I love it. I love Arya. I know so many of you do as well. So really what we've got is some of the best chapter sequencing we'll ever see in this series. All of that focus we just talked about from Jon on supposed Arya, the girl he hoped was Arya, and in his feelings on his sister. Well, to Jon, that was a dead end. It was all theoretical in the first place and it hasn't been realised. But for us, we now get to go and see the person herself. That girl who, little does she know, is really very much central focus of the Northern War and of Jon Snow's heart. One that's going to come back later on in the book to incite more chaos. And again, Arya has no idea about that. She's completely removed from everything in Westeros, pretty much, although it does drift in here and there, and has pretty much a new life for herself in Braavos, as we covered a lot during Feast. And that is what we are returning to here. The next stage in that life, the next stage in her training with the House of Black and White and the Faceless Men, what's been going on there, and also just a return to the city of Braavos, which is another fan favourite. It is one of the best examples of George's world building, just for its incredible detail and all these things that we still don't know about. I'm sure, as I'm sure many of you are, that the city is going to have a larger role to play going forward, so we get some setup for that as well, and it's just a lot to cover for what is actually a fairly short chapter. Before we get into it particularly, let's do some stats on Arya, because like I say, this is a major moment being returned to her now. Asha and Arya are one thing, but Arya is like 3 tiers above. Yes, we did absolutely miss Asha. Yes, but it has been a long time since we've spoken to Arya. But Arya is different. We all agree that. The only comparable feeling, really, is when we were given access to Bran again back at the beginning of this book, but since he's already gone from our pages, Arya is now being introduced to fill our Stark-shaped hole. Like we talked about in the Prepper episode, Jon has kind of, yes, he's of course still Stark and still part of that family. We've just been covering that in his last chapter. But he's so grown up now, he's got such an adult position. It is the Stark children I'm talking about. We obviously have no Sansa. We had Bran at the beginning. Now we have Arya, even if it is only a fleeting glimpse. And let's just recall here, let's just set ourselves up a bit, that for a decent chunk of the series, you really could have argued that Arya was the main, or one of the main, characters. She was a Triforce level person. She only had 5 chapters in Game of Thrones, I'm sure you'll remember, but then she was second and first for most chapters in Clash and Storm respectively, and she at least appeared in Feast, whereas the big 3, Tyrion, Dany, Jon, didn't. I'm sure you've seen it mentioned plenty of times that Arya is the only POV to be in all 5 books. There's probably a reason for that. On top of that frequency was her role. She gave us the widest view of the goings-on in Westeros with her knowledge of the North, her time in King's Landing, her time with Yoren, her time in Harrenhal, the time with the Brotherhood, and the time with Sandor, all with witnessing the Red Wedding. She got as close to that as anyone else not actually involved in it. So she's given us tons over the years, and it is, again, no small deal to return to her, because she also happens to be giving us tons about Braavos, which again, we figured to be important. The Facemen, again, we figured to be important, and Arya herself, I don't think I need to tell you, I think it's going to be incredibly important, even more so than we probably are dreaming of. Remember, at the end of Storm of Swords, only Jon and Tyrion had more POV chapters than her, and Jon only beat her by 1, so again, this is no small character we're returning to. It's been 56 full chapters since the last time we saw Arya, which is obviously her largest gap ever, and that might stick out to us the most given that earlier frequency. We've seen other people with huge gaps, but very few of them have that focus that Arya did early on. As I mentioned earlier, she had 3 chapters in Feast and now just 2, so it is a slight downgrade. And we've spoken loads about how different that felt then, we spoke about it again in the Prepper episode, and it's obviously just going to be repeated here with the odd feeling of her being inserted nearly 50 chapters into the book. It's just strange, isn't it, for her to pop up now, as well as the change in focus. We've spoken about it before, the Feast characters are returning. We've already had Arya, we've had Asha, even though she's kind of changed over to a Northern dance storyline, and we're going to be getting that in the coming weeks. We'll have Jaime next time, and it's not too long to wait for Cersei and Victarion to get involved as well. And actually, even if we look at her dance arc, such as it is, well, we've got just short of 20 chapters until that second outing as well. So that alone is larger than any gap she had in Feast, with just those 3 chapters, and obviously larger than any gap in the books coming before that. So there's a lot to adjust to in this book. This is not the Arya arc that we're used to, it's not the Arya character we're used to, but it is just wonderful to have her back. I've said it before, I'll say it again, we love her, and we've been wondering about her, of course. She is such a major character, she is such a favourite. The Braavos storyline is so up in the air, so we need more for her, and let's not forget, she finished Feast on a massive, major cliffhanger, one that she earned by doing honour to Jon Snow and her father and the Night's Watch, one she earned by being Arya, basically. So we are very keen to see what's become of that. That was one of the biggest cliffhangers of Feast, one that probably doesn't get enough credit, to be honest with you. We can probably be forgiven for that because there's just been so much going on in this book, but still it hit us hard at the time. As rereaders now, we know that luckily this blindness was only temporary, but we didn't at the time, remember. On first read of that chapter and this one, we thought this was right up there with maybe Bran's fall or Jaime's maiming in terms of absolutely changing a person's life and their ability to interact with the world, especially in a world like this, obviously not set up for people who've been disabled in whatever way. This was no small thing here. Arya had been robbed of her sight. That changes everything about a person's life, even in our current world, to say nothing of Braavos or Planetos as a whole. Now Arya, to be fair, is beyond resourceful and has access to more skills than most, but still, it's pretty damn big, isn't it? So as well as waiting to find out how this affects her and her situation personally within the House of Black and White, it also left us to wonder on the true nature of this house, of the Faceless Men. We knew it was dark and dodgy, but how dark and dodgy, considering they believe this to be a legitimate punishment? So we didn't know. Again, at the end of that chapter, we didn't know, is Arya still there? Is she trying to seek revenge on them? The questions go on and on, but really, it just comes down to caring for one of our most favourite characters. We want to find out that she's okay, hopefully. Now that's all pretty grim, isn't it? Especially with George reminding us of that fact early on, in the very first sentence of the chapter, that she wakes to darkness in every dawn. Doesn't really hit you harder than that, doesn't it? So George now, he decides to toss us an early bone with the fact that Arya is still dreaming of Nymeria. That's going to cheer us up. In fact, the dreams seem to be getting even stronger, which is obviously very exciting and exactly what we want to hear. Besides, we're not getting many Riverlands updates in this book, Jaime next week aside, so if we can't find out anything at all about Nymeria, we're going to take it. Unfortunately, we get nothing specific. There's no Frey revenge this time round. We're going to have to wait for wins. In fact, it's the opposite. There's innocent shepherds. They're going the same way as their sheep, all because of Nymeria. So if anything, this is closer to the dodgy Bran side of things than the cool revenge we normally get with Nymeria. We've had lots of discussions about Bran and how far is too far in terms of what these wolves can do or what these Starks can do. Nymeria is definitely in that conversation. She is dark as well, as dark as the rest, and we are forever unable to escape that fact in this book as opposed to the others. That's where we've really hit the focus. We love the direwolves, of course. We know their forces for good. Doesn't mean they don't have a dark side. Same as the Starks, you know my theories about that. Really all we get from this dream is that Nymeria is damn confident, which is cool, that's nice. But also, food is becoming more and more scarce. That is uncool. But the larger point is that Arya lives inside her in these dreams more and more, and let us consider how much of a release that is for someone who has lost their sight. This would have been great for Arya anyway, but now, specifically at this moment, is more needed than ever. We already know that Bran has used this kind of catharsis before, with using Summer to experience movement again after the shattering of his legs, and that's huge, of course. No one's denying that. But I would think that being given your sight back after it has been taken away is just beyond topping as a sweet relief to the soul. And on top of that, actually, I wonder how annoyed the kindly man would be if he knew his punishment was being lightened by these ancient powers that even he can't understand. Or, to look at it in another angle, maybe it actually makes it all worse. Being teased with sight in your dreams, only to have it ripped away by these dark dawns every morning. Whichever it is, this following quote, "She was the night wolf, but only when she dreamed," is a fucking cool line, and we can all assume that such awesomeness will not be restricted to dreams forever. Eventually it's going to be reality, waking reality, or at least we certainly hope so. Once Arya accepts that unfortunately she is no longer dreaming, the first thing she does is go back to her good old prayer, her named list, which serves as great nostalgia for us fans, given how often we've seen her repeat it, and how her fight with these people is rooted in past events, core events such as Ned's fall in King's Landing. So even that really just serves us to connect us back to Feast, doesn't it? Because we haven't had to think about many of those characters or those storylines being where we are in Dance, up at the wall, or over in Essos, or wherever it might be. So it's really clever from George to include that early on. More importantly, what it tells us is that this is still Arya. That identity has not been completely ripped away into no one territory just yet. Even if that's what she tells herself here, we know the truth. It's pretty funny actually, in its way. Arya insisting that this is the Nightwolf's prayer and that she is separate, she is no one, and then, in the very same sentence, also declaring that one day she will find them, hunt them, and kill them. It's kind of some laughable hypocrisy, and not that she's bothered or anything. She's no one, of course, so it doesn't matter to her. Sure, Arya, you keep saying that. So that's a good confirmation to have at the start again, because we might have been worried that the sight punishment was enough for Arya to fully throw herself into the idea of no one in the time that we've been away. Even if that is her intention, it obviously hasn't worked so far, so I'm glad that we've just confirmed that early on in this first page. The next paragraph gives two crucial bits of information. The first is that she is still in the House of Black and White, or she is still serving them at the very least. She wasn't kicked out for her crimes with Darien, or she hasn't left because of her punishment or whatever else. She is still going, she is still learning. And we have little to no idea about what this will mean for the main plot, but it's damn interesting, isn't it? The second point is this. Blind Beth was no water dancer, but she would not be Beth forever. So this comes off the note that she is growing larger and stronger, which is cool given how much we've already seen her do as a small child, so imagine what she does when she grows up a bit. But the quote also tells us that she has taken on a new identity to match her current situation, and that she does not think it is permanent, because she's been told so by the kinder man, or whether because she is super confident, we don't yet know, but it gives us a lot of hope. A sense of smell has already been given the spotlight on this first page. The sense that Nymeria picked up, Arya sniffing her clothes, sniffing her way through the temple as she is now, is obviously going to be a focus of the chapter going forward, as Arya is taught to rely on her other senses, to see this as a lesson and not a punishment. And remember, back at the time, we wondered whether all servants will have to eventually go through this, and Arya has just earned it a bit earlier via breaking the rules. We'll revisit that later, keep that in your mind. That focusing on other senses will be pointed out later, and Arya says as much here, so we know she's already put her resourcefulness to use in making sure she's getting along and can still survive in this world, as if we expected anything less from Arya. She also mentions that dream meat can't sustain her. There was a big time gap, but it is fun to see her learning the same lessons as Bran, because we haven't really got that before. Sansa obviously can't, we don't have access to Robb or Rickon, and Jon's age / his situation just makes it too different for him, so that's just a nice inclusion there. Being sightless also means having to appreciate food in a different way, not just by smell, but the texture and the taste as well, so you know George is going to have some fun with that and having to describe his food in a different way, but Arya is also advanced enough to be able to smell out specific people, or hear them, or both. I generally think George is having a lot of fun here, focusing on input that differs so much from what he normally has to describe in the visual, as it really gets pointed out a lot here. It definitely is one way to change things up. We always know George is looking for a different way to do things, to get his motor going. I think this is probably one of those examples. So using these extra senses, Arya has identified that the kindly man has returned to us now, and he comes asking his eternal question of, who are you? Arya gives her eternal answer of no one, but it seems that is still incorrect, much to our delight. She is just her latest identity. It's a different one, for sure, well done for that, but it's not truly no one. So his second question is an offer. Just say the word and you can have your eyes back. But we know the caveat is she'll have to leave if she chooses that choice. As we covered way back when, Arya doesn't think she has anywhere else to go. All other roads seem closed or pointless, even if we personally as readers know different. But even if that wasn't the case, it would likely be the same answer, because Arya is stubborn and determined as they come. She's not going to let this beat her. She will defeat the problem. She will show everybody that they're wrong. Her heart is all fiery ice in that way, we know that, we've seen it before. But it does confirm for us that this is reversible, there is a way back, and now we are obviously very much hoping to witness that sooner rather than later, maybe even in this very chapter. Arya is already confident that she betrays nothing of herself to the kindly man when she speaks. We know that's got to be at least half false, but he accepts her answer of not wanting her eyes back for now, and instead gets on to their daily update, the kind we are already used to from Feast Arya chapters. Apparently, the expectations for Arya have not changed with the loss of sight, so we really get that lesson theme shining through. She is still required to know 3 new things. Not suspect 3 things, and not 3 things that she already knew, such as the condition of the Sea Lord as we see here, but 3 new things. However, this is a quick note on the Sea Lord of Braavos being sick. I don't remember, you might be able to inform me if this is the first mention of such, I should probably look that up. But either way, it seems like that is going to come back in some way, in some importance. Especially when Arya doubles down on the fact that a bloody choosing will follow. George is obsessed with the transition of power, which is just bad timing to have to talk about that right now, but we'll blow past that. We've already been witness to the same kind of thing in Volantis, so are we going to have a repeat in Braavos? And it seems like the smart money says yes. And again, it is pretty clever chapter sequencing from George. We mentioned the Sea Lord of Braavos earlier with Dany, and we assume that's not the same one here, but it keeps the title fresh in our minds and just keeps that wheel turning. And who knows, maybe they get secrets or documents passed down to each of them. It definitely seems like we should remember the name Tormo Fragar. So that's the number 1 thing that she knows, now we need a second. And Arya is almost tempted to give information on Westeros, seen through Nymeria's eyes, but she resists. Still, we can pick it up, this thought about it snowing in the Riverlands, more chapter sequencing there, because we're going to see Jaime next week. But really, I think what it tells us privately is she's definitely not fooling anyone with this I am not Arya act. Sorry, Arya, just not working. Some things just remain unchanged from Feast. Well, it does set a good tone for how warging can be used for information gathering. Again, keep that in mind, that's going to come back later. Her second point is that one of the sex workers is pregnant and is uncertain of who the father is. Okay, that's good, although it doesn't really stick out to us right now. So she moves on to the third, is that the Merlin Queen, one of the courtesans, has taken on a new maid. And that one sticks out to me purely because we are already acquainted with the Merlin King, the ship that took Sansa from King's Landing to the Vale and was in service of Peter Baelish. I hope I have that right. Again, I haven't had time to check, so do correct me if I'm wrong there, but I'm pretty sure that's true. Now I know the Merlin King is one of the gods in Braavos anyway, so they might not be connected at all, but I just like anything that connects Arya to Sansa in whatever way, because we spoke about that a lot during Feast and how those two really mirrored each other, so I just like finding those. And perhaps Arya will one day have to take service with the Merlin Queen for one of her missions, and maybe, just like her sister, that particular name will turn out to be the vehicle that sets on the road to home. Maybe. Who knows? Maybe nothing comes of it. Either way, with that information giving, Arya is now dismissed to her duties, which she now carries out with a slender stick as a tool of assistance, a needle substitute you could say. As Arya is again trying to convince herself that she is no one, get ready for lots of that during this chapter, we are reintroduced to the waif, who is charged with giving Arya the poison or concoction that keeps her blind. So that's another point to keep us pretty hopeful there. It seems like if you stop drinking the milk, you stop being blind. So that's good because that can technically happen at any time. So again, we're waiting for that moment. At the same time, we get a reminder of the fact that it is either this constant reblinding, or you can leave. And Arya genuinely considers being blind as the better option. She'd rather that than have to leave. So that really tells you about her dedication. To keep with the theme of the waif, Arya reflects on the lessons, little and large, that she's been subjected to ever since she killed Darien and was made blind. Some are as simple as counting steps or taking note of markings in the walls, appreciating the details, basically the small print. Some are much larger, like being taught about poisons, their uses and their dangers. This, as much as anything, is confirmation that while she might be being punished, she's also considered a priority student, is what I'm guessing. She's being taught how to kill, how to be an effective assassin, how to walk in the shadows, and she seems to be in the fast track lane. That's all just a guess for right now, but for rereaders, we know how important this paragraph is going to be for her second chapter later in the book. Again, keep that in mind. We also have language lessons on top of that, so we can at least be content that Arya is getting one version of a really top-notch education that she's surely going to use a whole bunch in the future as all of our storylines collide. You could really imagine her being like the interpreter for all these people from Essos coming over and just helping out in that way. We're going to need some of that, aren't we? And also, her and the waif still play the lying game that we also covered in Feast. Only now Arya obviously has to rely on her sense and knowledge of tone, etc. to make any headway. This game was hard enough with sight, now she's without it. Still, she does learn, inch by inch. She gets better, and this is likely more important than poisons or languages. To be able to detect lies in this universe, in this world. Come on now, what could be more valuable? Just imagine that, considering how many lies we've seen throughout the series. Add that to Bran's own ability for researching the truth, you've got a hell of a team there. So I'm thinking this is the ability that we must remember most for Arya here. And to be honest, this kind of training montage theme here, that continues through the rest of this next few pages. The progress is not easy. Not for the simple things, and not for the more otherworldly things. There are plenty of setbacks, mainly in the form of trips and bumps, but this is again Arya Stark, despite what she says. She will not be beaten. Besides, the no one thing does allow a level of detachment that keeps her from breaking or feeling full emotion. That's probably not really healthy, but it is what's needed right now and it does help her get through, so it's of worth. And we get it surmised for us now of, again, how she's progressed, how she's got better. She's basically walked through the fire and come out the other side incredibly skilled and much advanced. True, she's only really conquered the temple, but it's still a huge feat that she's been able to do that having just lost her sight, or just being a young girl in the first place. So she now has access to the world that very few could really imagine. Just think how capable she's going to be when she has her eyes back. George really knows how to build up the expectation, and we fully expect that one day we will see the outcome of all these lessons in conjunction with that list that Arya holds in her heart. Or, even better, maybe in her return to the north. We move away from the training part of the chapter now to focus more on duties, because Arya still has plenty of those in the temple as well. And one of them is finding those who have died within the temple and looking after them, getting them prepared. At this point in the chapter, she actually finds 2 bodies, and the first is a young man who mystifies her in terms of his reasoning for coming to the temple and doing this to himself. She finds him at the feet of the stranger. There is one candle flickering above him, and she feels around his face to see what he looks at, so we get to see some of her skills off here. She thinks that he has curly hair, a handsome face, unlined. He was young. So some of that is just to show Arya's ability, her detective skills, but also some people in the fandom think that this is supposed to be a clue, that this is someone we're supposed to recognise, hence why Arya is focusing on her. Now I've got to be honest, this has never jumped out to me as something to debunk or to find out about, but like I say, others feel different. So I've seen several theories on who this could be, if it is someone important. That ranges from Tyrek Lannister to Loras. I've seen that argued lots of times. Personally, I don't buy either of it. I think the guy seems a bit too old to be Tyrek. And Loras, well, I'll admit, he does fit in. He has curly hair, he has a handsome face. There's the single candle thing, because we've had that line from him about Renly. I've seen people say that the old woman, therefore, is Olenna. That's the second corpse that Arya finds. And, well, you know how people go with these theories. That ranges from them coming over and giving themselves up to the Faceless Men to kill Cersei or take revenge or whatever. Again, I don't buy that personally myself, but I can see how people get there. So sure, go off, do whatever you like, but not for me. and maybe I'll be proved wrong. Maybe this is Loras and Olenna, or maybe it is someone else of high importance. I'd love to hear your ideas. Let's focus on this second corpse, this older woman who died while dreaming apparently, and with a smile on her face, which again feeds into some of those theories that she has come here, she has seen to Cersei's ruin or whatever else, but we'll leave that. Either way, it's just lovely that this woman died with a smile on her face in her dreams, because we all know how rare that is in this world. Once collected, Arya still follows the bodies down, deep down towards the vault, and part of the maze that is this temple, and yet we know from later this is not even its true secret, which is further down still, the one that is the place's true importance and its most important feature, but we'll have to wait for Arya's second installment to finally reach that revelation. For now, she gets on with her duty of stripping the body, and she focuses on coins, for they can tell you much in this type of setting, and Arya is still playing detective. And just having them here makes sense because Arya is already heavily associated with coins, and she will be again during her next chapter and the arc of this particular book, so this matters a bunch. Now the old woman doesn't actually have any coins, she just has a ring. Don't know if that plays into your theory making or not. The young man has 4 golden dragons out of Westeros, and Arya is examining those. She can figure anything out from them when she's interrupted by someone sneaking up and providing another lesson to Arya, that attacks can come at any time, and they do not care which of your senses are working. At first, she assumes it is the Quentyn man, but then she realises she has no idea who this mystery voice belongs to, which is all the more infuriating as the person dances around her, mocking her for her blindness. Though she does manage to connect with this attacker's stick on one occasion, Arya is essentially powerless and she ends up in a heap on the floor. So it's a lesson in humility, but it's also pure motivation and drive for proving them all wrong once she does get her eyes back, and she does show the good instincts and tactics required for swordplay, she just can't put it all back together yet. Back with the bodies now then, where Arya is becoming ever more used to the deceased and death as a constant companion. Arya does reflect slightly on the living people she has met in the city, mainly in her time as Cat of the Canals. She had freedom and even a sense of family then, with Brusco and his daughters, and Mary and all the other women on the Happy Port, the hundreds around that area of the city that we again saw in Feast. That had pretty much been her favourite time since she left King's Landing. She confirms that for us here, so that's important to take note of and appreciate a little bit, because it's not like Arya has a lot of those, is it? I killed Cat when I killed that singer. That's what she thinks here. So she knows why that time came to an end, but she doesn't regret it. Whatever it has cost her, whatever the kindly man says that the rules are, she knows in her heart of hearts that killing Darien was right. Which goes to show, as much as anything in this chapter, that her innate Starkness and the teachings of Eddard Stark, her father, cannot be removed by a name or a face change. They are permanent. She has this further for as well. Darien had been a deserter from the Night's Watch. He had deserved to die. As we said at the time, this harkens back to our very first image of the Starks and of Ned, so it's as basic a building block as we can get. Still, the kindly man insists it was wrong, and here we learn that we were right all along, and the blindness is a planned part of the education anyway, so our worries about it being permanent are finally wiped away completely. This would have happened at some point, just further down the road. The kindly man moved it up the schedule, firstly just to freak her out a bit, and presumably to make that education a bit harder for her because she'd broken the rules. Plus, it's forging by fire. He increased the intensity that was supposed to break her. All students presumably receive that intensity, but Arya's punishment was to get a much fiercer version, a more pointed effort to get her out. Obviously, that has very much failed, and the kindly man is likely more convinced than ever that Arya is a star pupil with a lot of potential. We get a repeat now of what we heard in Feast of the Order's founding and their basic philosophy that they are instruments of death and nothing more. It has the same holes in hypocrisy now as it did then. They are happy not to judge, but they're happy enough to get paid for it, and Arya can sense that out. Now I spoke a lot about that during Feast, so I'm not going to repeat it for you here, but I think the point still stands. He has this to say: "We kill men, but we do not presume to judge them. Do you understand?" No, she thought. Yes, she said. So the pureness in Arya can already sense that that isn't right, that doesn't make sense. What's the point in having the power if you are only going to use it to get rich? This is basically what they do. She can't put it in so many words yet, but she knows there is a higher calling, for her at least. The kindly man senses that she's not buying into their bullshit, so again decides to keep her blind and offers her the escape route once more. Arya refuses again, this time her thoughts and words aligning. The next transformation we have is Arya being made into a beggar, with all the little details of mummery. In her next chapter, we'll learn the ultimate trick of mummery, the real ultimate, and changing identities, but I suppose if you can be good at the normal version as well, you might as well do so. Besides, you would still need acting skills and need to learn how to be a different person, so Arya must go through this all the same. At the same time, we have a very sad paragraph on times gone by. We know being pretty wasn't important to Arya as a child, but it's still sad to hear how only Ned or Jon would call her pretty because they loved her most. It hurts to see how Catelyn couldn't accept her for who she was at the time. We know Catelyn loved her, and if she had any inkling of the future, she would have of course told Arya she was beautiful at every opportunity, but she didn't. That's the reality of it. We revisit the Arya Horseface name that Jane Paul admitted coming up with a few chapters back, and yet all these memories are so far away now because everyone's dead anyway, or so Arya thinks. All but Jon. She knows that, so George is really playing on the connection between these two and our heartstrings at the same time, as well as the possibility of that long-awaited, long-teased now reunion. Arya hears talk about Jon out in the city, which is as bittersweet as it can get until she thinks even Jon wouldn't recognise her now, and that makes both us and her very, very sad, even if it is superb chapter sequencing, seeing as we've just been talking about how much he wants to be back with her, again with that chapter sequencing today. Transformation complete, out into Braavos Arya heads, secretly armed with blades for anyone who might try to take advantage of her, although it is cool to hear her describe Braavos as a generally kind place overall, so those can exist, not everywhere has to be King's Landing. We get some more of the world building we always get in these Arya Braavos chapters, though there are some connections as well, as she passes the Red Priests and their growing night fires. For the night is dark and full of terrors, they prayed. Not for me, Arya thought. Yeah, she's just so cool, isn't she? We love to be back with her. Besides, she also shows off how much she treasures her nights shared with Nymeria, and it seems the rate of these dreams must be really increasing now. That is where Arya draws her true pleasure. That is what she really wants, even if she never admits it to herself. So that's great for our future hopes of where she might go, her strength of connection with Nymeria, and who she remains as a person. The descriptions and further world building of the city and its inns and ports are so vivid it really is easy to forget that Arya can't see any of it right now. You can generally forget that reading through these paragraphs. That's how great she is, it's how good George is as a writer. She has a great memory, but she's finding her way around purely by scent and sound right now, just showing how effective and powerful she really has become. It's pretty amazing. She smartly selects her destination for this night, and it's Pinto's at the end of the Ragman's Harbour, a place most likely to be safe, where she might be able to grab some food and be allowed to stay, and that is obviously all the better for finding 3 more of her new facts for the kindly man. This night is one such where all goes as planned. She's able to set herself up in a quiet corner and listen, but not before one of the cats comes to see her. They are not fooled by acts of memory, they know the soul underneath, which will later have us asking the question of whether they are fooled by actual face swapping. We know how important cats are through Arya's arc, hence her taking of the name previously, her mother's name, and you'll remember that tabby all the way back during her time in King's Landing. Right here and now, they are important as rare friends in this lonely world, a reminder that she remains the same deep down beneath as we keep saying, and rereaders know it's important we establish this connection for future plot threads of Arya in Braavos, some we're not going to have to wait very long for. As the night progresses, Arya listens to a great deal of people from all over the world, showing how valuable Braavos is as a port and hub. But eventually, there comes a conversation of great interest between 3 Lyseni sailors. They speak low, but Arya's superior training allows her to still hear them. Or, actually, is it that she's borrowing the hearing of the cat in her lap, the one it almost seems that she can see through as well? That seems pretty important, doesn't it? We've got no definitive answer to that question, but it's another huge hint of powers increasing, of Arya also being able to do the wake warging thing as Jon found out a bit earlier, and she's also extending out to other animals like Bran is. If anything, she seems to be collecting the largest number of warging abilities outside of Bran himself, who has a bunch more help, it's worth noting. So we should probably focus a lot more on just how powerful Arya is becoming at the warging thing. I know we always think of Bran first for that, but maybe Jon because he's actually with Ghost, but Arya, even though she's not near Nymeria, is heading down that path. At the very least, it's another hint towards her coming cat connection, and we can already see how amazingly valuable that could be for her missions, for her skills. We fast forward now to the next morning when the kindly man asks for her new facts that she is more than fully loaded to give as she retells the tales of these sailors, and it just so happens to be one that interacts brilliantly with the story we've already seen in Jon's chapter earlier on. Again, I'll say it, this Arya chapter truly is one of the best sequencing jobs we see in the entire series. Really, George could have put this almost anywhere in this half of the book, but he's placed it here for maximum effect, which means we should probably really be paying attention to what she has learned and how it might affect the stories of Jon, the Night's Watch, the others, the wildlings, and as we've guessed before, Davos. Like we covered previously when it first came up in that Davos chapter, this is all about Hardhome. 2 Lyseni ships landed there, named Goodheart and Elephant, because they were blown off course by these mighty winds we keep hearing about. Goodheart is now impounded here in Braavos because it is full of captured women and children, slaves, and Braavos, clearly, given its history, wants nothing to do with such, so they've punished them, they've impounded them. These poor slaves were actually wildlings, tricked aboard the 2 ships back at Hardhome because they believed they might be saved by them, and to be fair, the other choice was starvation, cold, or the others. So on they went, the women and children, only to be betrayed. But another storm hit on the way back, so the Goodheart ended up here in Braavos, And the elephant, well, we don't know, do we? Perhaps they went down. Perhaps they pushed through south of the Narrow Sea. Or perhaps they crashed up upon Skagos and await Davos to tell him the tale of what's happening at Hardhome, and that is how we kick off that whole plot thread. That seems pretty likely. I buy into that personally. Maybe you do too. All it means little to Arya, really, but it's plenty for us. This, again, is how we arrived at the whole Davos theory, and it has us wondering about the level of trust the mainly male wildlings will have when Jon's rescue fleet arrives, as well as the ground party he's supposed to be sending across. Whether that actually leaves or not, considering the end of Jon's arc in this book, we don't know, but still, it's going to be a problem at some point, isn't it? It's possible the Night Watcher is even going to have to war with other Lyseni slavers, apparently coming to milk this new resource. The word has got out. So it looks like Hardhome is going to be almost as chaotic as Castle Black. It's a major moment right here, which again, we have to say seems to be of high importance given its structuring, but just links so well with Jon's own thoughts in previous chapters. To Arya, it's used best as a distraction though. She gives such good info on her first two facts that she's able to deliver the third as a lightning surprise when she raps the knuckles of the kindly man with her stick, as she announces that he is the one who's been attacking her, that attack we saw earlier. This seemingly all-powerful man has been defeated, and he doesn't know how. And Arya is in no rush to tell him. She continues to retain her sense of self and resistance against becoming no one by keeping her own secrets. Luckily, we are still allowed in, as she details that cat coming home with her, hiding in the rafters, and watching. And Arya watching through him. So the hints we had earlier are now crystal clear. Arya can wake warg through other animals. Her skills are increasing at an amazing rate, and she seems to have superb control of them. Plus, she knows how best to use them, which is very, very exciting for future prospects, as we'll see as we go. And that's just in terms of being a spy or assassin. What about when she gets to Westeros and really gets to put things to good use? The mind boggles, doesn't it? In terms of this learning of skills and this kind of quick way she's doing it, it's fair to say that Arya was one of the most affected by the scrapping of the 5-year gap. George obviously had an image of how she would look after 5 hard years of training and has had to adjust that, still making her powerful and talented, but in a much shorter time, while it's still being believable and feeling earned, was a really, really tough task. And I think this chapter goes a huge way to showing his success in that. It really is impressive, so I think we should give him a bit of a note for that. Now back to the chapter. Obviously, the kindly man agrees to her level of progression and skill. He really thinks she's advanced at an unprecedented rate. He has no idea how she got so good so fast, and even more exciting for us is that she has an ability, on top of everything the Faceless Men are giving her, that these Faceless Men that the kindly man can't explain or defend against. So this chapter is really doing a lot for our future excitement of Arya. The reward for such is her sight back. That's how impressed the kindly man is. So we've got everything we've seen in this chapter, all her abilities and talents, plus she's just earned her biggest loss back. She's whole again. Now, that really makes her a real force to be reckoned with, doesn't it? It's pretty unbelievable, so please George, don't hesitate, give us some more. We need more Arya. This was impressive enough. Now with the power of sight, what can't she do? Well, we're going to see the truth of that statement later in the book when we see her reach yet another level, a really, really big level of her time in Braavos and with the Faceless Men. Now I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to do too much of a wrap up because this one is going long. I have more work to do to get more out to you. We're still doing catch up here. So that is today's chapters. I hope you liked them as much as I did. Very, very quickly here, I will tell you what we've got coming up next week. It's another 4 for you. And we're going to be beginning back in the north like we did today, but this time inside Winterfell with Theon in the chapter A Ghost of Winterfell, where everything really starts going to hell for Camp Bolton, so you know we like that. We then have Tyrion 10. We find out what's happened with these slavers, where Tyrion's wound up, and what his new life and world looks like. Then we'll have Jaime 1. So like today, we get a big old blast from the past, another central character coming back. You know we're going to really enjoy that. And then we'll finish with Jon 10, which is kind of a direct follow-on to what we saw today in terms of Alice Karstark, what Jon's going to do about all that, the Karstark conundrum, with a pretty big, important cliffhanger at the end of that as well. So that won't be too far in the future, you won't have to wait long for that, as we again are playing catch-up. But in the meantime, again, I hope you had a good holidays. Thank you for being patient, thank you for coming back to us now. Here's to many more in the future. I hope you're all staying safe out there. I hope that I was helping you in whatever situation you're currently in. Thank you everybody, we will see you next time.